Bedtime stories for adults. If, like me, some of your fondest memories are of being tucked in and hearing a favorite story as you drifted off to sleep, you'll love this channel. Here, you'll find gentle bedtime readings of my own books, narrated by my assistant May, in a soft, soothing voice designed to help you relax. No jarring sound effects, no sudden noises, just calm, feel good stories to ease you into sleep. If you enjoy these stories and would like to support the channel, you can also find all of my books available on Amazon. Chapter 10, Mangleclaw. The climb grew crueler as we drew higher, the air sharp enough to sting my throat, the cold seeping into my bones. The wind no longer howled. It whispered. Low, steady, curling around the rocks like a warning too ancient to ignore. I slowed, lifting my hand for Nimicie, though I couldn't see her. The crunch of her boots stopped at once. I listened. Nothing. Not even a raven now. Just the creak of snow shifting on ice. The world was holding its breath. We crept along a narrow ledge where the cliff face sloped back just enough to hold drifts of snow. My bow felt heavier than usual, though I hadn't drawn it. Every few steps I glanced at the ground, half expecting to see prints larger than my chest pressed into the frost. None yet. But they'd be here. Then Nimicie brushed my sleeve, invisible fingers tugging, and when I glanced back, she was dragging a pine bough behind her. The wide swath of needles wiped away her prints, scattering her scent into the drift. Smart girl. I gave the air a faint nod of approval, though she couldn't see the grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. The trail bent, hugging the cliff, and when we came around it, the land opened into a frozen basin of stone and ice. There, halfway up the far wall, yawned the cave. Its mouth was black, jagged, like a wound in the mountain's side. Snow feathered down from the overhang above, but none lay on the ledge just inside. That place was alive. I froze. 20 yards, maybe less. Close enough that I swore I felt heat pushing out against the cold, heavy breaths rolling like fog I couldn't quite see. The hairs on my neck stood, and I pressed a hand to the stone wall, grounding myself. The silence was wrong. A silence that weighed on you, that pressed into your chest until your own heartbeat sounded too loud. I turned my head slightly, speaking no louder than a breath. Stay behind me. Cloak tight. Nimicie's hand brushed mine once in answer, then vanished again as she melted back into nothing. Snow shifted somewhere inside the cave. A scrape like stone dragged against stone. My fingers closed around the bowstring without pulling it back. I wasn't sure if it was to steady my hands or to remind myself I was ready. We were here, at his door, and somewhere in the dark, Mangleclaw was waiting. Oh, Don, Nimicie whispered, her voice barely trembling in the icy air. I'm picking up his thoughts. Oh, so cruel, so raw. She pressed a hand to her mouth, shuddering. Oh, ugh! The smell? Don, I can smell it. All the blood, the shit, the sickly sweet mangled rotting bodies. Oh, Don, oh, Blag. A stream of sickness came out of nowhere, splattering into the snow, then again another stream. Are you okay? I whispered, panic rising. We'll be so sorry, came her voice, faint and broken. Well then, come on. He's sure to smell that soon, if he didn't hear it already. Let's move. We quickly but quietly shifted to a tree about 5 yards closer. Nimicie had dropped the branch she'd been dragging, and now her boot prints and her scent mingled in the air with mine. The snow crunched beneath us, each step sounding like a crack of thunder in the silence. Then he came. The great bear lumbered out of his cave, a mountain of white fur streaked with scars and filth. His head swung side to side, jaws parting as a low growl rumbled from his chest. He sniffed the air once, twice, then slammed his front paws into the snow. The ground shook beneath us, a dull boom rolling across the mountain as if the stone itself had groaned. My heart seized in my chest. Quickly, I yanked Valdor's vial from my pouch and hurled it at the beast's feet. It struck the ice, but didn't break. The bear lowered his massive head, snorting at it, confusion in the gleam of his eye. Cursing under my breath, I knocked an arrow and let fly. The shot struck true. The vial shattered, bursting into a mighty green cloud that curled up and over the bear like smoke from a cauldron. The gas, a sleeping potion strong enough to drop a herd of oxen, only staggered him. His massive head swayed. He looked drunk, but his eyes locked on me, sharp and furious. Fumbling for a Saren sleeping arrow, I barely had time to breathe before he lunged, snow exploding beneath his paws. My fingers found the arrow. I knocked it, but my bowstring caught on the thick buckskin sleeve, jerking the shot. The arrow tumbled uselessly into the snow 3 feet in front of me. The beast was almost on me. I dove, snatched the arrow, and turned on my back, bow raised to fire. Above me, the full weight of Mangleclaw came down, a wall of fur and teeth and rage, blotting out the sky. But before I could release, a green plume of magic streaked through the air and struck him. A net burst open, glowing and alive, wrapping around him as he fell. The netted thrashing monster crashed down 3 feet behind me, close enough that one claw raked across my back. Even through double-stitched buckskins, through the layer beneath, his talons carved deep, a half-inch into my flesh. Fire shot up my spine as I rose to my knees, screaming in pain. "Move, Don," a voice cried, sharp as thunder. Nimicie's voice. "Move, Don? I don't care. I'll shoot with you there or not. Move!" Every nerve in my body blazed, but I staggered up and hurled myself toward a tree on my left, the bark tearing at my hands as I clung for cover. A heartbeat later, a great plume of blue cloud engulfed the bear. He roared, shredding at the net with his claws, writhing, thrashing, the ground shivering with every blow. The sound tore through the mountains, rage and agony all at once. Then silence. I stumbled upright, every muscle burning, terror gripping my chest. My fiancé, my Nimicie, had loosed the final strike. My best friend, my brother-in-arms from another life? Was he gone? I staggered forward. The massive body lay still, my throat closed. Then, a breath. A deep, shuddering inhale, fog rolling from his nostrils into the frozen air. Alive. Mangleclaw was alive, and motionless in the net. "Useless pieces of shit, uncle!" I screamed, mad as fuck, yanking off the torn buckskins and throwing them to the ground, kicking them across the snow. The cold bit at my skin, but I barely noticed, my blood boiling hotter than any forge fire. Nimicie stormed toward me, hood off, cloak still on, nothing but a floating, furious head bobbing against the bleak mountain snow. Her voice cut like steel. "That's your friend, Don? That's your fucking friend? He literally scared the shit out of me. I have shit running down my leg, Don." Even with her rage blazing and her face red, I couldn't help it. A grin cracked across my face. "Take off the cloak. I'm not marrying a head with no body." She ripped the cloak off and hurled it into the snow, where it vanished. "Oh shit!" she gasped. "Well, now you'll have a wife with a body and no head." Dropping to her knees, she clawed at the snow, hands searching for the cloak like a madwoman. I knelt beside Mangleclaw, my fury cooling as my palm pressed to his side. The great beast twitched under my touch, muscle shifting beneath scarred fur. He was alive. Gods, he was alive. Nimicie's bowstring creaked. She had another arrow already drawn, eyes blazing. "Don't shoot him with a normal arrow," I said, half laughing, half pleading. "You'll just piss him off. Find that cloak." "I stink. I'm full of shit and puke, and now I'm going to lose my head," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to echo through the trees. "Got it!" she cried at last, clutching the cloak in her hands. She balled it up and stuffed it into her rider's pouch with a hard shove. Then she spun on her heel, fury trailing her like a storm. "I'm going back down to the camp to take a bath, and I very well may not come back," she shouted, stomping down the trail, her angry footsteps cracking through the snow, and then she was gone, her curses fading into the mountain wind. The mountain seemed to hold its breath after Nimicie stormed off, her voice still echoing in my ears. Only the wind dared to move, whispering through the pines, sharp and cold. Mangleclaw's body shifted under the net, muscles straining, cords of power twitching against the glowing green weave. His eyes cracked open. Not drowsy, not dazed, wide awake and burning with hate. They fixed on me, yellow fire beneath heavy lids, and I knew right then Valdor's draught hadn't sent him to sleep at all. It had only locked his body down, left him awake inside the prison of his own flesh. A groan rolled up from his chest, low, guttural, like stone tearing from stone. He wanted me dead. Every inch of him screamed it. I could feel it in the air, smell it in the hot stench of his breath. Still, I knelt. My hand trembled as I laid it against his side, fur bristling, skin hot under the scars. The rumble grew louder, vibrating through my palm, but the net held. "I know you're in there," I said, my voice low, rough. "I know you hate me. You want to tear me in half, and maybe you will. But I didn't come here to kill you. I came here to save you." Again. His eyes narrowed, the fury in them undimmed. He could hear me. I felt it. But the curse held him like chains, forcing him to relive every dwarf he'd slaughtered, every cry, every blade, every last nightmare. His jaws worked, teeth grinding as if he could bite through the spell itself. I leaned closer, close enough to smell the rot clinging to his breath, and whispered, "You're not alone, Chili. Not this time. I'll stay until you know me again. I'll fight through it with you." For a heartbeat, the growl softened, the chest beneath my palm rising less violently. Then it came back, harsh and bitter, a reminder. He was still cursed, still Mangleclaw, and still very much a threat. I decided to get ready just in case. Taking my net arrow from my Saren quiver, I knocked it into my bow and left it on a flat rock beside me. The weight of it there, close to hand, was a comfort. Then, sweeping away the snow about 4 feet in front of his side, I cleared a round circle of ground, the dirt hard as iron beneath the crust of frost. I gathered rocks from the tree line and branches snapped brittle from the cold, building a crude fire pit. My fingers were stiff, clumsy from the chill, but the small flame finally took, licking up from the kindling and throwing weak shadows against the mountain wall. All the while I spoke, my voice low and steady, not for me, but for him. Mangleclaw's eyes tracked me, sharp and hateful, but I talked anyway. I told him stories of me and Chili, how we first met, what he did for me, how he dragged me out of my grief-filled drunken stupor, how I'd nursed him back to health. My words floated into the thin air, half confession, half prayer, and if nothing else, it filled the silence that pressed down like a stone. Movement caught my eye. A group of snow hares, maybe half a dozen, hopping and nibbling at the sparse brush 20 yards out. For now, I left the net arrow on the rock, took my bow and a handful of normal shafts, and crouched right beside Mangleclaw. 3 quick shots, 3 clean kills. The rabbits flopped still in the snow, white fur stained red. I went to fetch them, this time bringing both my bow and the net arrow, just in case. Back at the fire, I tossed one of the hares down right in front of the great bear's face and skinned and gutted the other 2 with practiced hands, laying their meat on a stick across the flames. The smell of blood and wood smoke curled into the cave mouth. The sap carried on the frozen wind. That's when Mangleclaw's tongue made it through the weave of the net. Great, broad, and blue as slate, it groped clumsily at the ground, searching, rooting for the rabbit. The massive tongue fell into the dirt and stayed there, twitching with stubborn life. "Still too doped to move, huh, buddy?" I said, shaking my head. Grabbing a handful of guts from the cleaned rabbits, I shoved them into his mouth, and his jaws twitched weakly as he swallowed. For a moment, his eyes closed, not in peace, but in something like memory. I went to my pack and pulled out the salve Kelser had given me, my sewing kit, and a pair of needle-nose pliers I always carried, best tool I'd ever found for getting old arrowheads out of Chili. Slowly, carefully, I worked. One by one, I pulled rusted arrow tips from Mangleclaw's hide, each withdrawal leaving behind a weeping wound. I smeared the salve thickly to ease the sting, the sharp herbal smell mixing with smoke and blood. Then I stitched him up, steady hands working in the firelight, sewing the torn flesh shut. Every time the metal bit tugged, his body shuddered under my touch, and his eyes flashed at me. Fury, pain, hate. But I kept going, talking to him all the while, hoping against hope he could hear the truth in my words. Nimicie returned freshly washed and with a backpack of goodies and things we didn't know we needed, but all would be useful. "He's still having those horrible thoughts, Don. Ugh, and the smell. I'm gonna go way over there to set camp." She pointed up and opposite the cave. "You in a better mood now?" I asked while sewing up Mangleclaw. "No, not really. And your Captain Woods has a glass jaw," openly laughing. "What?" When I got back to camp, before I even had a bath, I was surrounded by Magni, Anduin, your mom, and Captain Woods. I think Valdor was there too. I said, "We got him. He's netted and sleeping, and you're doing God knows what to him." So I reached into my riding pouch and gave the cape back to Anduin. He said, "It smells and it's wet. Take it back and clean it." I started poking him in the chest and telling him I smell of puke and shit, and your Captain Woods grabbed my arm. "You do not." That's all he got out before I belted him right in the face, and he hit the ground like a ton of bricks. "Out," I guffawed, nearly dropping my needle as she stomped over and sat beside Mangleclaw, too mad to be afraid. And then all of them, Magni, Anduin, your mother, and Valdor, followed me into the cabin as I stripped and got into the tub. Your mother threw a screen up in front of me just before everyone got a good look at me naked, asking all kinds of questions. I ordered water, and those kings scrambled like little boys, ordering everyone. I had 10 buckets of hot water, soap, brushes, and towels within 3 minutes. I roared with laughter as she continued, eyes flashing. In the bath. And your mother scrubbing me down. I told the whole story. Magni says he's sorry about the buckskins. He didn't know your size and you look huge. Anduin says you owe him 10 gold for the cleaning of his cloak. And Valdor does not believe his potion didn't work and says you must have done something wrong. So I yelled at him till your Anduin stepped in and made both me and Valdor apologize and play nice. And to top it off, Captain Woods woke up, bruised jaw and all, and Anduin made me apologize to him too. I leaned against Mangleclaw, holding my sides, guffawing like a fool while she sat red-faced and fuming. Your mom filled the backpack for us, but I don't know what's in it or where she got it, truthfully. Nimicie huffed, throwing her hands in the air. That set me off again, laughing until my eyes watered, while Mangleclaw gave a long, low snore as if mocking us both. I leaned against Mangleclaw, holding my sides, guffawing like a fool while she sat red-faced and fuming. Your mom filled the backpack for us, but I don't know what's in it or where she got it, truthfully. Nimicie huffed, throwing her hands in the air. That set me off again, laughing until my eyes watered, while Mangleclaw gave a long, low snore as if mocking us both. I stopped laughing, blinked, and said to myself, Did I hear a snore? Is he sleeping? I asked Nimicie. No, he says you're boring. Me or you? I asked. Oh, and now he won't talk to me. Answer me, you stupid bear. Nimicie kicked at his paw. Nimicie, are you nuts? Don't get him angry. She stood there tapping her foot in distraction. Oh, he's not going to hurt us, Don. He's done with killing. He was trying to get you to kill him. That's why he attacked you. Oh, you're talking again. Guess I'm not so boring, huh? Hiff, came from Mangleclaw. Oh, okay, I'll ask. Nimicie said. He wants to know why you're doing this. He says when your mate is here, he can understand you better. And why you keep calling him chilly. He can't feel cold. Nimicie, my love, would you sit here with us so he can understand me, please? I begged. Nimicie sat down and held her nose. Not that it would help, the smell was in her mind. But still, she sat. I started talking all over again, telling Mangleclaw about my chili and what we had meant to each other. The pains we went through together, the joy, the laughter, the hunts, all of it. Mangleclaw huffed again, and Nimicie said, He asked again why you call him chilly. Would you be likened to hear the story? I started. Nimicie balled her fist at me. Donald Jonathan Zart, if I hear any more dwarf today. I held up my hands. Okay. I stopped, stood up, and started thinking. What's different? He should have been snoring hours ago. I said aloud, Why am I not lifting the curse? I'm half dwarf. It worked before. Hiff! A muffled yowl rumbled from Mangleclaw's chest. Nimicie pressed her fingers to her temple, her voice hushed but steady. He says it's the net, it's not working, if it ever would, because you face no danger. Quote, in the face of danger, if a dwarf ever shows kindness to him, the curse would be lifted. End quote. Nimicie, where's the arrow shaft this net came from? I asked. I don't know. He's probably lying on it, she muttered. Hiff! Oh, okay, she said, half smiling despite herself. He says it's under his ass. The feathers have been tickling him for hours. I shook my head and circled to the back of the bear. Kneeling in the snow, I dug away at the hard-packed drift and frozen dirt, working my arm under his massive flank. I got it! I yelled, yanking the broken shaft free and holding it up. But no instructions on how to get the net off. Let me see it? Nimicie asked, stepping close. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the faint markings carved along the shaft. Hush up, you! She suddenly snapped, glaring down at the bear. What? I asked, confused. He says his ass is itchy now since you pulled it out, she said, rolling her eyes. Despite everything, I chuckled and leaned in. No words, Dawn, but what do these arrows mean? She pointed to either end of the shaft. I took the arrow back, then reached for her hand. Together, we knelt beside Mangleclaw. My voice dropped low. Okay, buddy, I'm going to try and release you now. And if you kill us, you're going to be up here with those thoughts a very, very long time. Nimicie stepped back 5 or 6 yards, bow raised, another net arrow already knocked. Her eyes never left the beast. Mangleclaw blinked at me. Once, twice, slow and deliberate. I'll take that, as you're not going to hurt us, I whispered. With steady hands, I turned the arrow shaft around and tapped it against the glowing strands of the net. The etched symbols flared, the broken head reshaping itself as the net grew thinner and thinner until at last it vanished like smoke on the wind. Mangleclaw rolled heavily onto his side, free at last. Snow cascaded off his massive shoulders. Nimicie broke into laughter, her voice carrying bright in the cold air. Don, would you please scratch his ass for him? Still laughing, I reached both hands over and scratched his thick hide. The bear rumbled, then loosed a thunderous, earth-shaking snore that rattled through my bones. Was that it? Did it work? I asked, hope tugging at the corners of my smile. Nimicie lowered her bow, relief washing over her face. Well, the images are gone. And thank God, so is the smell. And he's asleep. She grinned, her hands spreading wide. Yes! I shouted, leaping to my feet. Shh! Nimicie hissed, half laughing, half scolding, as the mountain seemed to settle into silence around us. The cursed beast, Mangleclaw, slept at last. Chapter 11. Deep healing for all. As I sat there with my friend, listening to his heavy, rattling snores echoing into the night, I let the firelight dance across his scarred hide. The mountain wind hissed through the pines, tugging at my cloak, but it was the bear's breathing, steady, deep, and alive, that anchored me. For the first time since arriving here, I felt something close to peace. I wonder if he really meant it, I murmured to myself. That he's done with killing? The thought clung to me like smoke. Could a beast that had carried so much rage, so much curse-fed violence, truly put it behind him? Or was this only the eye of a storm? Still, the weight of him there, 2,000 pounds of fur, fang, and raw history, made me grin. My mind wandered, mischief creeping in despite everything. How am I going to take care of a 2,000-pound vegetarian bear? The snicker escaped my lips before I could stop it. What are you laughing at? Nimicie's voice floated over, soft and drowsy, as she slid against me and tucked herself into the crook of my arm. Her warmth and the faint scent of soap clung to her, proof she'd scrubbed the worst of her ordeal away. What would we do with a 2,000-pound vegetarian bear? I asked, kissing the crown of her dark hair, half amused and half serious. She chuckled faintly, but her eyes were already heavy. Where were you? I asked, curious. Checking out that cave, she whispered, her words lazy with sleep. You know there's a water spring in there and a huge vein of gold running from ceiling to floor at the back. I blinked, pulling back just enough to see her face. Really? Well, she said, a faint smile curling her lips as her head sank against my chest. I'm no geologist, but I know a vein of gold when I see it. Within moments, her breathing evened out, soft snores rising and falling in rhythm with the bear's. I leaned my head back against the tree, the fire snapping low in front of us, and let out a slow breath. Guess the arrowheads will have to wait till tomorrow, I muttered, eyes drifting from the girl in my arms to the beast at my feet, the two most unlikely allies fate could have handed me. My lips quirked into a smile, but it does give me an idea on how we can get Chili out of here easier. The wind whistled, the fire glowed low, and the mountain held its secrets for another night. Morning came, and the mountain felt alive again. Birds sang sharp, piercing notes from the trees overhead, their wings scattering tiny avalanches of frost with every takeoff. Somewhere far down the slope, a lone longhorn sheep bleated for a mate, its call echoing through the granite walls like a horn in the still air. Nimicie was still curled up in deep sleep, her cheek pressed into my chest. Carefully, I eased her over onto Mangleclaw's thick white side, the bear's snores rumbling like distant thunder. She didn't stir, and neither did he, so I rose, rubbing the stiffness from my shoulders. I made my way into the cave, drawn by the faint glimmer I'd only half believed in the night before. The chamber opened wide and high, the ceiling glittering with long teeth of ice and stone, stalactites that caught the dawn light and fractured it into shards. And there, just as Nimicie had said, a vein of gold ran from ceiling to floor. It was as wide as a man's shoulders, glowing faintly in the cold shadows, an impossible river of wealth frozen in the mountain. By the gods, I whispered, brushing my hand against the metal. It was real, heavy, cold, pure. I turned toward the spring that gurgled at the back of the cavern, its waters running clear over stone. Kneeling, I dipped a hand in and tasted. Clean, sharp, icy fresh. Perfect. Filling the battered old coffee pot with a grin, I slung it by the handle and made my way back to camp. Morning, my sweet. Coffee's on, I said, setting the pot on the fire as Nimicie stirred awake. her hair a raven's nest around her face. While the water heated, I rummaged through the backpack Mom had pressed on us. Ah! I grunted in satisfaction, pulling out a small hatchet. Perfect. Heading back into the cave, I raised the tool and hammered it against the vein. Sparks danced, sharp and angry in the cold gloom. On the third strike, a chunk of gold the size of my fist broke free with a ringing crack. I picked it up, its weight satisfying in my palm, and scooped a few smaller pebble-sized shards into my pouch as well. Proof enough. Returning, I tucked the treasure into my rider's pouch and glanced at Nimicie. Would you stay with Mangleclaw and keep him safe for a few hours while I run back to camp? I asked, still half asleep. She rolled against the bear and mumbled, You get me a couple of rabbits for breakfast, skin them, clean them, and put them on the fire, and I'll do it. Her words were punctuated with a sleepy nuzzle into Mangleclaw's fur. Deal, I said with a chuckle, though my attention shifted quickly to the bear himself. The rabbit I'd left him the night before was gone. Bones, fur, everything. Hungry, lad, aren't you? I muttered. Slinging my bow, I slipped into the snow. Before long, I dropped 3 more hares. Carrying them back, I tossed one down in front of Mangleclaw, along with the skins and guts of the other 2. He gave a faint grunt, nose twitching, and lapped them up without opening his eyes. The cleaned meat went on the fire for Nimicie, filling the air with the smell of roasting breakfast. With that done, I checked my gear, adjusted my pouch heavy with gold, and set off down the trail. I got to camp, and Magni was in the middle of his breakfast. I walked up to him. Your Majesty, I bowed. May I have a quick word with you alone, Uncle? His eyes widened. I be sorry about the size of your buckskins, lad. Your mother already almost pulled my ear off. See, one's longer than the other be. I chuckled. I'm not here to kill you, Uncle, I said, then leaned in close. I'm here to make you a very rich and powerful king. I leaned back and smiled. Bring you breakfast. The dawn light slanted through the pines and warmed the carved wood of the cabin. Magni looked at me, half amused and half wary, as steam curled from his mug. With Anduin, Valdor, and Captain Woods already gone back to Stormwind the night before, the camp was quieter this morning. Just dwarves going about their work and my mother bustling among them. I suggested we slip into the empty hunting cabin Anduin had left behind for Magni and close the door behind us. The little room smelled of pine smoke and damp furs. Outside, the camp hummed with men and dwarves moving about their chores. So, Uncle, I began, my bear is sleeping. The curse is broken, but he's not trained yet and still very wild. I have a plan, and if you help, I'll make you very rich. While he ate, half listening, I plopped the huge chunk of gold down in front of him. Now I had his attention. His fork paused midair. The gold caught the light like a hot coin of the sun. I told him about the vein in the cave, its sweep of metal from ceiling to floor, and my plan to get Mangleclaw out of Dunmorog and to the Zart Ranch in Loch Modan. I outlined how we'd move him quietly, use old, unused trails to avoid dwarf settlements, and take steam from the swamplands north to the Grizzly Hills for training away from prying eyes. Magni listened, shifting his weight, beard twitching as he weighed it. If I can see the gold, he said at last, I'll consider it. Fine, I said. Be ready in half an hour. I want a bath and breakfast first, then we'll sneak him out of camp. Smagni grunted, already rolling plans in his head. Outside the door, the camp carried on. Dwarves splitting wood, voices raised in morning greetings, and the steady sound of hooves stamping against frozen earth. I pocketed the small pieces of gold and stepped back into the cold, heart thudding with a new kind of purpose. The plan was set in motion. On the way out of camp, the guards were still posted at the pass, stoic in the snow with frost lining their beards. Shockingly, one of them was the guard captain himself. He spotted the king instantly, straightening, and called out, Where are you going, your majesty? Magni folded his arms across his chest. I'm going up to see my nephew's bear for meself. Me nephew, a Kingsguard trained with a chest full of medals, has promised me safety, but no one else's. Would you like to come along, Captain? The captain glanced between us, then shook his head with a stiff little bow. Have a good family day, your majesty. He turned back to his post, hand on his axe, as solid as the mountain itself. Magni grumbled something under his beard, and we pressed on, boots crunching the snow-crusted path. The morning was thin and cold, the air so sharp it stung the lungs, but shafts of light pierced through the gray sky and caught in the snowbanks, glittering. The mountain loomed above, daunting, dangerous, and yet hauntingly beautiful with its veils of mist trailing over the cliffs. As we climbed, I laid it out plain. If I'm to get Mangleclaw down from here, Uncle, I'll need more than grit and rope. I'll need the sail off one of your warships, strong canvas, big enough to rig into a harness, a huge gypsy wagon with 2 Clydesdales to pull him, but with a trick. It folds down into a flat buckboard so we can hide what we're really carrying. And gypsy clothing, male and female both, to pass unseen if anyone asks questions. Magni stroked his beard, breath steaming. That's a bold list, lad. Sailcloth, Clydesdales, and gypsy rags. Ye sound more like a thief than me, nephew. Maybe, I admitted, but if it works, we'll get him to Loch Modan without a soul knowing who or what he is. And if it doesn't, well, you'll be the richer for it. The king grunted, giving me a sideways look. If the gold is as you say, boy, I'll not only give ye what you ask, I'll see it done fast. Bring me to this cave. Let me lay me eyes on this golden wall. Then we'll talk wagons and sails. We hiked on, the trail narrowing, icy winds slipping down from the peaks like cold fingers. Far below, the campfires were only faint smudges of smoke in the white valley, but ahead, waiting, was the dark mouth of the cave and the promise of gold. We pressed on, boots crunching the crusted snow. The mountain loomed above, daunting, dangerous, yet hauntingly beautiful, veils of mist trailing like torn banners from the black cliffs. As we climbed, I laid it out plain. If I'm to get Mangleclaw down from here, Uncle, I'll need the sail off one of your warships. Big canvas. A huge gypsy wagon with 2 Clydesdales that folds down over a flat buckboard, and male and female gypsy clothing. Magni snorted under his beard. That's a bold list, lad. If the gold is to your liking, bring them to the cave and I'll take it from there, I said. He grunted assent, and we climbed the last bend toward the mouth of the cave. When we got to the camp, Nimicie had taken over, taking all the arrowheads out of Mangleclaw's skin and sewing him up with the salve to soothe. Seeing us, she held up a bucket. 167 so far and plenty more to go, she said, shaking the bucket. I'm using a bucket because I want to see how many we can get out, as well as buckshot and spearheads. Magni spoke. He be a huge beastie. No wonder you wanted him, lad. I took the king into the cave, and seeing the gold, the swears that came out of him would make a sailor blush. I laughed. While you plan your retirement, Uncle, I'll go get some water for Nimicie. I left the king at the gold vein, went and grabbed a fresh bucket of water for Nimicie. Walking up to her, I said, "Fresh water," handing her the bucket, and she asked me to dump the bucket of blood-filled water somewhere. So I walked a little ways out of camp and dumped the blood, then headed back. "Nimicie," I said softly when I returned, "I need a favor. Take the backpack back to Mom and ask the king if he'll walk you down. I don't want him alone, Nimicie. He is the king after all." "Oh, and have you washed those arrowheads?" "No, why?" "Offer them to His Majesty in a pouch, just as they are. I'll start a new bucket and keep track of your numbers," and turn to the king. "Your Majesty, would you do me the honor of escorting a young lady down the mountain?" Magni's booming laugh filled the cave. He offered his arm, and together they started down the snowy trail. Nimicie bundled the bloodied arrowheads into a leather pouch, proof as old as hate, and pressed it into the king's hand. The pouch swung at his side as they left, gold gleaming behind them, the morning bright on their shoulders. I watched them vanish into the trees. The crunch of their boots faded into the wind, and for a long moment the mountain seemed to breathe with me, patient, steady, unhurried. The fire popped behind me, throwing sparks into the white air. I turned back to the camp, to the still figure lying beside the flames. Mangleclaw's chest rose and fell, stitched and scarred, but steady as the mountain itself. The smell of pine smoke mingled with blood and salve, a strange cocktail that clung to my hands and cloak. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the rhythm of the bear's breathing, the sound that told me he was still alive, still fighting. And in that moment, with the king and Nimicie gone, the weight of what lay ahead pressed full onto my shoulders. I eased down onto the packed snow, set needle and thread across my knee, and reached for the new bucket. My fingers were stiff, raw from hours of pulling steel from hide, but there was no question of stopping. "Easy, buddy," I murmured, leaning close to the bear's ear. "We've still got work to do, you and me." The mountain wind hissed against the rocks, carrying whispers like voices long gone. Somewhere, a raven cried sharp and lonely. The fire crackled, holding back the dark with its thin wall of warmth. Mangleclaw shifted in his sleep, his great paw twitching against the snow, but he didn't wake. I threaded the needle again, pushed my hand against his side, and steadied myself. For the first time in a long while, I felt the day turning our way. The gold was real. The plan was set. And the beast beside me, broken, scarred, and sleeping, was no longer just a curse. He was hope. The mountain listened, and I worked on the plan. The sun had shifted into early afternoon, the light sharp and glittering across the snow. Thin clouds hung against the mountainside, and smoke from the fire curled straight up into the pale sky. I sat cross-legged in the snow beside Mangleclaw, working with my kit, arrowhead after arrowhead pulled from his hide, every one of them leaving a small shaved patch that I stitched neat and tight. His massive white frame looked almost comical now, like a checkerboard of fur and scars, his breaths deep and steady as he slept belly down in the snow. Behind me, half a mountain sheep roasted on a spit over the fire, its fat sizzling into the flames. A rack of lashed-together branches stood nearby, a stretched hide already drying in the crisp mountain air. The sudden rush of wings caught my ear. Nimicie glided down on her white griffin, snow scattering as its claws touched the ground. She slid off, her cheeks flushed from the wind, a crooked smile already on her lips. "His Majesty is back at camp," she called, brushing her hair from her face. "You know that dirty old man flirted with me all the way down the mountain." I chuckled, not looking up as I worked another rusted arrowhead free. "He was testing you. I hope you passed." "Coffee's on the fire. Careful, it's hot." Nimicie raised an eyebrow, tilting her head. "Testing me?" I leaned into the bear's side, sewing up a neat line of stitches as I explained. "When a male dwarf wants to marry, the other males in his family will flirt with the woman he's chosen. If any of them get anywhere, the story gets back to him. And if he still marries her after that, the gifts at the wedding are, well, lesser. Sometimes no gifts at all." Her eyes widened and she pressed a hand to her mouth, then laughed nervously. "He got a kiss on the cheek before I left." Throwing my head back, I laughed out loud. "Say goodbye to your jeweled plates. Now come help me. I found an extra razor and needle-nose pliers in my kit, over there by the tree." I pointed with a bloody glove, still working. She poured herself a cup of coffee, steam fogging her face, then rummaged through my rider's pouch under the tree. She came back with the tools in hand, still muttering about cheek kisses and lost gifts, before kneeling opposite me to help with the endless work of freeing Mangleclaw from his buried pain. Nimicie knelt down across from me, tools in hand, her hair falling loose over her shoulder. She wrinkled her nose, but she didn't hesitate. "Gods, Don, he stinks even after all this sewing and salve. How did you do this before without me?" "With a strong stomach and a lot more ale," I said, tugging another arrowhead free and tossing it into the bucket with a clink. "Besides, I wasn't half so careful then. Chili used to growl and nip at me when I missed a stitch." Mangleclaw here, well, he doesn't get a choice yet. She smirked, dipping the pliers into the salve before pressing them to the next wound. "So what you're saying is, you were a worse nurse back then." I gave her a mock glare. "I prefer to think of it as efficient." "Hmm?" she teased, yanking another shard of steel free. The bear twitched and she winced. "Sorry, big guy." We worked in a rhythm for a while. Pluck, salve, stitch, toss, until the bucket was clattering full, like a chest of cursed treasure. I sat back, wiping sweat from my forehead, and watched her hands move deftly. There was a gentleness to her touch, even when she was irritated. "You know," I said, breaking the silence, "you look good with a needle in your hand." She looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare say, 'just like my mother.'" I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the thread. "Wouldn't dream of it. Though your aim with a stitch isn't half bad." Nimicie rolled her eyes, but a blush crept across her cheeks. She dabbed the salve on another cut, then leaned back to stretch. "How many do you think are left?" I glanced at the bear's vast frame, the checkerboard of fur and skin. If the bucket's at 167, I'd wager another 100 or so at least. Maybe more. Her jaw dropped. "Don, that's days of work." I admitted, tugging another needle through, "but he's got time now. So do we." The bear huffed in his sleep, his ribs rising and falling slow and steady. For a moment, I swore the air around him felt lighter, as though each stitch was pulling the curse further away. Nimicie sipped her coffee, then set it aside and reached for another wound. You know, I never thought I'd be elbow deep in bear hide, pulling out ancient steel, when I pictured my future with you. What did you picture? I asked, curious. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to mine. A house, maybe. A hearth. A family. My hands stilled. I looked at her, really looked at her, and then smiled softly. Then this is practice. A bear this size is like raising 5 children at once. She groaned, but she was smiling now too. God's help us if you're serious. Always serious, I said, and leaned across to kiss her quickly before returning to my stitches. The bucket rang again, another arrowhead joining the pile. Nimicie sighed, brushed her hair back, and muttered, "We're going to need a second bucket." I chuckled. Then we'll start a pile. One day, when Mangleclaw's healed, we'll show him. Every shard, every piece of hate we pulled from him. Proof he's not alone anymore. For a moment, the fire cracked, the mountain air sharp around us, and the bear's snores rumbled like distant thunder. It felt like healing. Not just for him, but for us too. They worked in silence for another 2 hours, the firelight flickering across Mangleclaw's massive frame. His fur looked like a checkerboard now, white patches interrupted by shaved spots stitched tight where wounds had been closed. From his haunches to the middle of his ribs, the once pristine coat was a patchwork of suffering and survival. Another arrowhead came free with a wet clink and dropped into the second bucket, the sound dull but strangely satisfying. Nimicie sat back on her heels, shoulders slumping. "Okay, that's it for me today," she sighed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I'm going to grab some dinner and take a nap." "You go ahead." "Love," I said, flexing my aching hands, but still working at the thick hide. "I want to keep at it a while longer. I'll join you soon. My hands are cramping too." She rose, stretching her long arms over her head, joints popping after hours crouched over the beast. The smell of roasting mountain sheep drew her toward the fire. She tore a strip of bark to use as a plate, carved herself a generous slice of meat, and returned to sit cross-legged beside me. The steam from her dinner rose between us, carrying the rich scent of fat and char. "Tell me of this plan of yours," she said between bites, watching me fuss with the pliers. Still bent over Mangleclaw, I kept talking while I worked. "Well, tomorrow we'll get a supply drop from the Griffins, hopefully near camp and hopefully in the morning. A ship's sail, strong ropes, block and tackle. The works." I leaned back, wiping sweat from my brow with my forearm. "We'll lay the ropes 6 feet apart, spread the sail over them, and then the hard part. Get Mangleclaw up and onto it. With luck, he'll walk over and fall asleep on it. If not, we drag him." Nimicie raised an eyebrow, chewing thoughtfully as she listened. "Once he's on," I went on, "we wrap him up tight in the sail and tie it off. He'll love that. He's always liked being bundled in blankets. Then we hitch the ropes to our griffins and fly him low and slow down the mountain. At the bottom, a massive buckboard will be waiting, sides folded down to look like a gypsy wagon, drawn by 2 Clydesdales. We disguise ourselves in the gypsy clothing that'll come with it and travel unnoticed." She tore off another strip of meat and muttered, "Unnoticed, with a 2,000-pound bear." I chuckled, but kept on. "We take him straight to Mom and Dad's ranch and hide him in the barn until he's healed. Meanwhile, Magni," I jabbed at another arrowhead, twisting until it popped free. "I'm sure he's already planning his side. He'll send guards to hunt the biggest hill grizzly they can find, sneak it back to Ironforge, skin it, dye the hide white, and let it rot in a cage for a few days. Then he'll hold a gathering, claim his historians, discovered old records about Mangleclaw's mountain, hiding a massive gold vein, and promise glory and wealth for the dwarves. He'll parade the rotting carcass through Dunmoragh as proof, reopen the mountain, and when his people demand evidence, he'll present the bloodied arrowheads you gave him. They'll test true." I sat back and gave her a tired grin. Simple. Nimicie stopped chewing and gave me a long look, somewhere between disbelief and admiration. Then, with her mouth half full of roasted mutton, she asked, "What if a dwarf wants to buy wares from our wagon?" I smirked, easing another arrowhead from Mangleclaw's hide with a satisfying pop. Though courteous, any self-respecting dwarf won't go near gypsies. They're too afraid of spending a copper on a pot with a hole in it. I chuckled, shaking my head. We'll be able to pass through any small town with no problem. And if we do see some curious dwarves sniffing around, we'll just call out, "Where's for sale?" and they'll scatter like sheep. Nimicie giggled, nearly choking on her bite, then covered her mouth and laughed harder. The sound echoed softly through the snowy pass, light against the weight of the mountain. Mangleclaw snored on, his patched fur rising and falling in steady rhythm, and for the first time that day, the camp felt almost peaceful. When Nimicie had finished eating, licking the grease from her fingers with a satisfied hum, I leaned closer and said, "Love, I need a favor. Take your griffin up about 20 feet above the tree line, low and slow, all the way down to camp. Time it. I need to know how long Mangleclaw would be in the air. He hates flying, and if he wakes up mid-flight, he'll tear that sail to shreds and drop like a stone. So, slow and comfortable, like he's being rocked to sleep. Then come straight back and tell me how long it took. Can you do that for me?" She gave me a firm nod, wiped her hands on the bark plate, and stood. "All right, but you owe me a foot rub later." With a whistle, her white griffin swooped from its perch in the pines. Nimicie mounted smoothly, her hair catching the firelight as she turned the beast toward the valley below. I watched her silhouette fade into the snow-laden sky, the rhythmic beat of wings carrying her low across the trees. Careful and steady. Mangleclaw snored on, oblivious, while I busied myself pulling another rusted arrowhead from his hide. It felt like longer than it was when the griffin's cry announced her return. Nimicie slid down, cheeks pink from the cold, breath clouding as she strode back to me. 16 minutes, she reported, brushing snow from her shoulders. Give or take, depending on the wind. I nodded, storing the number in my mind. 16 minutes? We can work with that. Mangleclaw stirred, letting out a deep rumble like shifting thunder, then settled back into his slumber. Nimicie spoke softly, her eyes still on the sleeping bulk of the beast. "Don, I had an idea on how we can move him. In my hunter's training from the army, we learned how to interact with our animals' dreams and get them to sort of sleepwalk. I think I might be able to do this with Mangleclaw. It would make getting him on the sail easier." I shifted, pulling the tools and scraps of hide away from his great frame, then stood next to her, studying her face. "See if you can get him to roll onto his back," I instructed. Nimicie stepped to Mangleclaw's massive head, snow crunching under her boots, and closed her eyes. She raised both hands to her temples like she was drawing a bowstring of thought itself. For a long breath, nothing happened. Then, with a rumble and a twitch, the great bear slowly shifted, rolling onto his back with a weighty thud that shook snow from the branches above. My eyes widened. "Get him to raise his right paw." She concentrated, brow furrowed, and the enormous paw rose into the air like a soldier at attention, spraying powdery snow. Nimicie's face broke into a grin, then laughter bubbled out of her as she opened her eyes. She giggled, then laughed full-throated, pointing at the beast. "He's dancing with a bighorned sheep," she said, tears in her eyes from laughing. My blood ran cold. Quickly, I rushed to her, scooped her up in both arms, and carried her 20 feet back, setting her down hard against a pine trunk. "He's going to eat that sheep," I said urgently. Mangleclaw's dreaming face shifted, his muzzle elongated, teeth bared into 7-inch razors, claws darting out like spears, straight into the snow where Nimicie had been standing only moments before. She screamed, face buried in my chest, trembling. "I'm sorry, love. That was my fault," I whispered, holding her tight. As if on cue, the bear's features softened again. The terrible claws withdrew, his snout shortened, and he rolled lazily, rubbing his belly. A great sigh escaped him, and then he licked his lips with this enormous blue tongue before drifting back into steady snores. Nimicie pulled back, eyes wide and pale. "Holy shit, Don," she gasped. "I nearly shit my pants again," I chuckled, brushing her hair back. "I'm sorry, love. But look, he's back to himself and happy. You gave him a meal." Sure enough, Mangleclaw lay peacefully on his back, tongue flopping out, chest rising and falling in deep contentment. Snowflakes drifted down onto his patchwork fur, catching in the firelight as though even the mountain itself sighed with relief. I brushed my hand across Nimicie's cheek, still warm from her panic. "We'll need to be careful with that trick," I said quietly, eyes flicking back to Mangleclaw's massive chest as it rose and fell in slumber. "You can guide him, but only gently. If you push too hard, the curse memories come back, and he'll strike." We'll use it just enough to make him shuffle, roll, maybe even walk onto that sail. Nothing more. She nodded, pressing her lips tight. I know, I felt it. Like walking a knife edge. One wrong thought, and he turns monster again. Then we stay on the safe side, I murmured. You keep the dream soft. Sheep, rivers, whatever calms him. I'll be right here to keep watch. The fire crackled low, painting us both in amber light. Nimicie slid closer, curling into my side, her head under my chin. Fine, she sighed, relaxing against me. But you owe me for nearly scaring me to death. Fair enough, I said with a grin, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. She fished in her pouch, eyes twinkling now, and pulled out 2 cigars. Almost forgot about these, she whispered, handing one over. Now that, I said, taking it and striking a spark, is the best idea you've had all day. We sat together in the snow, backs against the tree, smoke curling upward into the cold mountain night. Mangleclaw snored like a thunderstorm only a few feet away, but for once it didn't unsettle me. With Nimicie warm against my chest and the glow of firelight dancing on the snow, the world felt still, safe, if only for the moment. We puffed in silence, the sharp tang of smoke mixing with the clean mountain air. Nimicie leaned her head against my shoulder, eyes half-lidded, her breath drifting slow and even. I pulled the cloak tighter around us both, content to let the night stretch unbroken. Wrapped in each other's arms, we smoked, laughed softly at nothing at all, and let the mountain cradle us. By the time the cigars had burned low, her hand had slipped into mine, our fingers laced. The fire hissed low in the pit, the embers glowing red as the stars wheeled high above. And there, with Mangleclaw dreaming peacefully and the mountain keeping its secrets, we drifted at last into sleep. Chapter 13. It's hard to walk a sleeping bear. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, their orange light casting faint halos across the snow. I stirred first, stiff from leaning back against the tree all night, and found Nimicie curled into me, her breath soft against my chest. The air was crisp, cold enough to sting the lungs, but the blanket of her warmth and the faint, smoke-sweet scent of last night's cigars made me linger there, content. Mangleclaw's snores rumbled like distant avalanches, steady and deep. For the first time since we found him, the sound didn't feel threatening. It was almost comforting. His massive frame lay sprawled on his back, belly rising and falling, the checkerboard of shaved and stitched patches glaring against the rest of his thick white fur. The sun was just cresting the ridge, painting the peaks in firelight and spilling gold down into the valley. Birds were beginning to call, timid and cautious, as if uncertain whether this mountain was still cursed or waking free. Nimicie stirred, blinking against the morning light, then smiled when she realized she was still wrapped in my arms. "Morning, Mr. Zart," she whispered, her voice rough from sleep. "Morning, love," I said, pressing a kiss into her hair. "Coffee's long gone cold, but the fire might still be warm enough to spark it up again." She groaned softly, snuggling tighter. "Later. Let's stay like this a little longer. Just us and the snoring giant." I chuckled, careful not to disturb her too much. "We'll need every bit of rest. Today's the day we try the impossible, walking a sleeping bear." Her laugh was muffled against my chest, but there was no fear in it now. Just trust, and the faintest thrill of daring. About 15 minutes later, overhead, a griffin cried, a piercing call like a giant eagle echoing across the ridgeline. I gently pushed Nimicie off me, and she rolled onto her side with a sleepy murmur. I strode to the clearing beside the cave, waving my arms high above my head. The griffin swooped low, its rider giving me a sharp wave before banking away. A crate tumbled free, a small white parachute billowing behind it, and it landed in the snow with a muted whump just a few feet in front of me. I knelt and pulled the lid open. Inside was everything we needed, and more. Block and tackle straight off a warship, 6-inch thick ropes coiled and tarred, a massive block of wax for the lines, and at the very bottom, a folded mainsail so heavy it took every ounce of my strength just to heave it halfway out of the crate. Beneath it, tucked into the corner, lay a note scrawled in a sailor's hand. "Whoever is getting this, return to HMS Bounty when finished, in the same condition it was given." I let out a short chuckle. "Aye, and maybe I'll polish it up for you too," I muttered, shaking my head. When I looked back, Nimicie was perched on a rock near the fire, still wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee from both hands like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks pink from the cold, but there was a softness in her eyes that made me smile. She caught me looking, squinted over her steaming mug, and murmured, half asleep, "What's so funny?" "Just sailors being sailors," I answered, brushing the snow off the sail and thinking how in the nine hells we were going to get a 2,000-pound bear to lie down on it. I tugged the sail free at last, shaking loose the stiff folds until the canvas spread across the snow. It wasn't the massive mainsail I had feared. It was a topsail, 20, maybe 25 feet when laid flat. Manageable. Just big enough for a 2,000-pound bear to sprawl across if luck stayed with us. "Looks like they were thinking ahead," I muttered, dragging it into position in the clearing just outside the cave. Nimicie shuffled over, still wrapped in her blanket, and crouched beside me. Together we rolled out the ropes, 6 thick lines that looked more at home on a galleon than a mountainside. I ran them beneath the sail, spacing them 6 feet apart, then set to waxing the lengths so they wouldn't fray under strain. The cold bit at my fingers, but the rhythm of the work was steadying. Nimicie finally shed her blanket and joined in, pulling knots tight with the sailor's precision she must have picked up from me. "This isn't so bad," she said, tugging one rope snug beneath the canvas. "Almost like building a tent." "Except the tent bites back," I answered dryly, glancing over my shoulder at Mangleclaw. He was still stretched out on his back, his chest rising and falling in slow, rumbling snores, looking almost peaceful under the pale winter sun. Almost. By the time we were finished, the sail lay spread and ready, the ropes lined out in neat order, each one tied with loops to be hitched to griffins. I stood back, stretching the ache out of my shoulders, and let out a long breath. "There," I said. "Now all that's left is convincing our friend to take a nap right in the middle of it." Nimicie raised a brow and smirked. "That's the easy part, right?" I laughed once, sharp and tired. "Easy as teaching a bear to dance." "Since you're up," I said with a smile, looking at Nimicie, "want to go hunting?" She turned and pointed at the still-quartered sheep on the spit, higher now to keep warm but not burn. "Not for us, for Mangleclaw. I want him to have a full belly tonight when we move him." She nodded with a grin, and we gathered our gear, bows slung and quivers full, the mountain wind biting at our faces as we stepped out of camp. The snow was shallow in patches here, but the air was sharp, each breath sending steam into the pale light of day. Ravens circled overhead, cawing and drifting like scraps of shadow against the white sky. On our way out of camp, Nimicie tilted her head at me. "Didn't you say a while back you had 3 rules for having an animal companion? One of them being, don't do anything for it that it can do for itself?" I glanced over at her while she smiled slyly at me. "Fine," I grumbled. "If you want an angry, tummy-grumbling bear to deal with, we can stay here and sleep." "Ha, no!" she said with a laugh that echoed off the stone walls, and we started down the trail. By midday, we had found nothing. Just the crunch of our boots in the snow, the scrape of wind over bare stone, and the occasional distant cry of a hawk. Rounding a bend in the mountain path, Nimicie suddenly pulled me back behind a jagged rock face, her hand clamping over my mouth. 40 yards, she whispered, her breath hot in the cold air, in the meadow to the right. Her eyes gleamed as she leaned close. I spotted it. "This is my hunt." She slowly slid her hand from my mouth, and I nodded once. Then she crouched low, bow coming off her back as silently as a cat unsheathing claws. An arrow was knocked in one smooth movement, and she began to creep around the rock, each step careful, deliberate. Once she slipped out of sight, I drew my own bow and nocked an arrow, squatting low and circling the other side of the rock to watch. The meadow opened up before us, a patch of brown and white where snow thinned out. There, grazing with its head down, was a huge ram, horns curling like carved stone. Nimicie was already moving like a snake through the snow, belly low, the wind in her favor. She inched closer, closer. 30 yards now. In one sudden motion, she rose to her feet and loosed. The arrow whistled through the cold air and struck just above the heart. The ram jerked, staggered, then bolted. I raised my bow, but didn't fire. Nimicie was faster. In a heartbeat, she had knocked another arrow and let fly. It slammed into the base of the ram's skull, dropping it mid-stride. Before I could even blink, she had knocked a third, spinning around, scanning the meadow for scavengers or prowling predators eager to steal her kill. As she spun, bow ready, I walked calmly past, heading straight for her fallen prize. Took you too, I said with a chuckle. Oh, ha ha ha! She shot back, lowering her bow with a grin. He moved. That's your excuse, huh? I teased. We both went to look at her in a settle. The ram sprawled in the snow. Its horns were massive, its body thick with winter fat, well over 100 pounds, maybe 120. Nimicie crouched and tugged her arrows free while I bent down, fumbling to get the heavy beast across my back, bow and arrows digging into my ribs beneath the weight. You want to wait till I get this thing on my back? Or do you want to help carry it? I asked through clenched teeth. Nimicie slid her arrows back into her quiver with exaggerated care, dusted her hands, and grinned. Nope. I killed it. You carry it. She laughed, light and bright against the wind, as I staggered upright under the heavy burden, muttering curses she ignored. The weight of the ram pressed down hard on my shoulders, horns jabbing into my back with each step, but I kept on trudging through the snow. Nimicie skipped lightly beside me, humming to herself, as though she hadn't just dropped a 200-pound beast with near-perfect shots. The mountain path wound before us, white snow glittering beneath the pale winter sun. Far below, valleys rolled out like painted canvas, silver pines dusted with frost, frozen rivers gleaming like glass, and clouds drifting low as if they too were tired and wanted to rest on the shoulders of the peaks. What do you want done with the skin? I finally asked, huffing, shifting the ram's weight higher. Nimicie gave me a curious look. Are you not going to feed it to him whole? I chuckled through clenched teeth, nearly losing my balance on a patch of ice. Feed him the skin and hair, and you'll regret it. Chili used to get into the sheep pen back home. Ate one whole, wool, hooves, everything. He had gas so bad I thought the windows of the ranch would shatter. If you think Mangleclaw stinks now. She burst out laughing, doubling over in the snow until she had to wipe tears from her eyes. Gods help us all if he blows like that up here. Not enough time to tan it anyway, she added, catching her breath. And we've no salt. Then I'll clean it and stretch it, I said, adjusting the ram on my shoulders as we crested the last rise. Leave it on the rack with the other beside the cave entrance. Magni can have it. King needs something to keep his toes warm when he's sitting on piles of gold. The camp came into view. Quiet, smoke gone from the air, the fire burned out to blackened ash. Mangleclaw still lay snoring, chest rising and falling like a mountain of fur. The snow around him sparkled in the late sun, turning the whole clearing into a glowing amphitheater of light. I dropped the ram with a grunt near the rack, shaking my arms out from the strain. Nimicie set to work immediately, clearing away the old ashes and stacking fresh pine branches into the fire ring. Her movements were sure and practiced, every flick of her wrist purposeful. Sparks flew as she struck steel to flint, and soon orange flames licked skyward again, warm and steady. She hung the blackened pot over it, the smell of fresh coffee already promising to thaw the cold in my bones. Meanwhile, I pulled out my knives, rolling the ram onto its back. The wet, sharp rip of skin against flesh filled the clearing as I worked the hide loose, steam rising where the hot blood met the chill air. My breath puffed in time with the slicing of the blade, and I draped the heavy hide over the rack beside the cave's entrance. Soon it hung stiff and glistening, beside the first hide we'd left there days ago, a strange pair of trophies waiting for Magni's eye. By the time I wiped my hands clean on the snow and sat back, the fire was strong, the scent of roasting meat and brewing coffee swirling through the air. Above us, the mountain sky had shifted toward dusk, clouds streaked crimson and violet, peaks glowing as though lit from within. I sat on a log, catching my breath, watching Nimicie crouched by the fire, cheeks flushed in the firelight, hair catching the last of the sun. For a moment, despite the stitched-up monster sleeping behind us, the world felt almost peaceful. I dragged the skinned ram over the snow and dropped it in front of Mangleclaw. Wiping my hands on my pants, I turned to Nimicie, held out my hand, and pulled her about 10 feet away. Now don't look if you don't want to see that face again, I warned softly. But Mangleclaw surprised us both. With a heavy grunt, he rolled onto his belly and rose, shaking snow from his fur, eyes still heavy with sleep. He blinked a few times, looked at us, then back at the ram, and in a blur of motion gobbled it whole in half a second. Bones, hooves, meat, gone. He licked his lips, then turned, lumbering toward us, paws dragging lazily in the snow. My eyes darted to Nimicie. Her bow was already drawn, a net arrow notched, her stance perfect, but the bear ignored her. Hiff, he rumbled, and as he passed between us, he brushed against me, deliberate, heavy, the way Chili used to do, the way of saying thank you. You're welcome, buddy, I said, a tear stinging my eye. Nimicie eased her bow down, arrow still at the ready, but her breath came quick. Mangleclaw, though, just ambled past us, slow and dreamy. He found the sail spread on the snow and sniffed at it curiously. Then, with a deep, satisfied groan, he flopped down right in the middle. With one massive paw, he hooked the edge, dragged it under his head, and began rolling. Over and over, tighter and tighter, until the canvas bound him snug like a child wrapping up in blankets. He settled with a snore, wrapped tight as a drum. Good bear, I shouted, throwing my hands up toward Nimicie like I just pulled off a grand performance. Ta-da! She dropped her bow completely, the arrow falling to the ground, and bent over laughing so hard she nearly doubled herself in half. And there he lay, the great and terrible Mangleclaw, snoring like a bug in a rug. Dinner was simple but good, the last of the sheep roasted over the fire. Nimicie leaned against me, chewing slowly, then wrinkled her nose and pressed her face into my shoulder. Ooh! She groaned, shoving herself upright. What now? I asked, feigning innocence. She rummaged through her riding kit, muttering, until she came up with a battered block of soap. Marching back, she slapped it into my hand, pointed toward the cave, and stomped her foot. I straightened, clicked my heels together, and threw her a salute. Yes, Lieutenant, ma'am! She rolled her eyes, but couldn't keep the smile off her lips as I jogged off into the cave to scrub the stink of bear and blood and days of hard work from me. Left alone with the campfire glow and the steady rumble of Mangleclaw's snores, Nimicie wandered over to the wrapped giant. He looked ridiculous. Trussed in the sail like a child burritoed in a blanket, but still regal in his own dangerous way. She crouched by his massive head, hesitated, then scratched the fur between his ears. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He loves you, you know. Now don't break his heart, or you'll have me to deal with. Without so much as opening an eye, Mangleclaw's absurdly long blue tongue darted out and gave her free hand one sloppy lick. Nimicie froze, then chuckled despite herself, shaking her head. Great. Now you're sweet on me, too. She rose slowly, brushed the snow from her knees, and ambled back to the fire. She pulled a bit of meat off the spit, settled cross-legged, and waited for me to return, her expression softening as the night wrapped quiet and close around the camp. I came back from the cave, shirt off, toweling myself with the dirty buckskin. Nimicie, still by the fire, raised her brows and pointed past me into the night sky. What's that? She asked, voice curious. I turned, squinting. Far below, over the dark line of the hunting camp, a flare arced up, burning bright against the stars. That, my girl, I said with a grin, is our cue. My lady, our carriage awaits. Quickly, I hauled on a fresh buckskin shirt and went to work. With Nimicie's help, we lashed thick lines around Mangleclaw's bundled form, snugging the knots so he was wrapped tighter than a sailor's chest. Nimicie readied the griffins, pacing them 20 feet apart and stamping their talons into the snow. As I tied the last line, she called over her shoulder. That flare wasn't anywhere near the camp, Don. Why'd you have me time the flight if you didn't need the information? I jogged past with a rope and tossed her a grin. Oh, but I did. I needed to know you could fly low and straight. No stunts, no dives, unlike the last time. That's a dirty trick, Don. She shot back, cinching the saddle straps tight. That's 2-foot rubs you owe me now. Done, I chuckled, looping the final knot. Together we mounted. With a whistle, the griffins spread their wings, the ropes went taut, and slowly, so slowly, the great bear rose with us, swaying in his canvas cocoon like the centerpiece of some bizarre parade. Low over the trees we flew, the mountain wind biting but steady, our wings beating in time. When we reached the clearing, the wagon was waiting, a lone guard holding the Clydesdale's reins. We eased Mangleclaw down, set him square on the buckboard, then hurried to disguise the load. The guard lifted one side, Nimicie the other, while I clambered atop, flipping the folding walls and barring them in place. Roof sections dropped down, tailgate swung up, bolts clicked home. When I hopped down, all that remained was a trader's wagon sitting innocently in the snow. Breathless, I leaned against the wheel, sweat running down my temples. The guard pointed at a crate beside the wagon, snapped a salute, and walked off without a word. Nimicie was already bent over the crate before I'd even wiped the sweat from my brow, tossing items aside with a clatter. "What's all this junk?" she grumbled, pulling out ropes of beads, bundles of cloth, and brass pots. "Stuff to hang on the sides of the wagon as wares for sale," I answered, dusting my hands. "A disguise, plain and simple." "Oh, Don!" Her voice suddenly shot up an octave, delighted. She popped out of the crate, eyes sparkling, holding a stunning red dress. It was full length, heavy fabric cut to flow, but trimmed in golden embroidery that shimmered even in the firelight. Matching scarves spilled over her arm. "Put it on," I suggested with a grin, half teasing, half curious. And much to my dismay, and maybe a bit of secret pride, she stripped right there in the clearing. Down to her bra and panties without so much as a blush, she slid the dress over her head in one smooth motion. It fit as if it had been sewn for her alone, hugging every curve, the low neckline glancing dangerously close to scandal. The gold trim danced with every move she made. "By the light," I muttered, unable to look away. She ignored me, too caught up in her own fun. A scarf tied behind her head became a proper gypsy wrap. From the crate, she plucked 2 oversized golden hoops and slid them into her ears. Then she twirled, the skirts flaring, a mischievous smile plastered across her face. Finally, she reached back into the crate and pulled out a folded note, laughter bubbling up as she read it aloud. "Lad, I hope my tailor got your sizes right this time. I do not want my ears pulled off from your mother again. Magni." Her laughter rang bright in the quiet clearing, echoing off the mountain stone. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. The wagon stood ready in its disguise, the bears snored soundly inside, and Nimicie, dressed like a queen of the gypsies, looked every inch the part. The plan was coming together. Chapter 14, The Road to Loch Moden. The night was clear, not a cloud in the sky, rare for Dunmorog. The moon, big and bright, kissed the snow and made it glow with silver light. Every drift shimmered as if sprinkled with powdered glass, and the jagged ridgelines gleamed like frozen spines. It was beautiful, almost sacred, but dangerous too. Good for visibility, not so much for stealth. Shadows stretched long and thin across the trail, and any movement stood out sharp against the pale. Still, the route I had planned was little known, a narrow thread through half-forgotten places. It wound past small farm towns that clung stubbornly to the frost-bitten soil, where candlelit windows glowed faintly in the distance, each promising warmth and ale but demanding caution. 2 dwarven outposts lay along the way instead of 5, less chance of prying eyes, less chance of questions. But the trade-off. That was the hard part. We would have to go the dangerous way through Loch Moden. A broad valley shadowed by cliffs, its path pressed tight against the lake and the mountain wall. Right there, just beyond the choke point, sat a guard station and a trader's hub, a rowdy strip popular with soldiers on leave. Men and women in heavy mail would be buying trinkets for sweethearts back home, gambling their pay at dice, or spending coin on cheap ale and cheaper company. A place where too many eyes lingered too long, and strangers stood out like sparks in the snow. Then came the mine. A kobold-crawling copper pit, its tunnels guarded by more than greed. The little creatures might look foolish with their squeaky voices and sputtering candles, but they were ferocious when it came to defending what they thought was theirs. Trespassers rarely left without bruises, or worse. And past that, the swamps. A low, miserable stretch where the earth turned to sucking mud and the air thickened with buzzing wings. Hornet wasps swarmed there, their stings leaving welts that burned for days. The ground itself shifted underfoot, soft and treacherous, eager to pull boots down into black pools that looked shallow until they swallowed you to the waist. On the far side of it all lay the narrow pass beneath the mountains. Beyond that, home. The Zart Ranch. I could almost see it in my mind. The rolling slopes below the peaks, the familiar smoke curling from the chimney, the smell of pinewood fire and fresh-baked bread. But before that warmth, before that safety, the road demanded its toll. If the dam was repaired in this realm, the whole path would be simple. Quick, easy, a march instead of a gauntlet. But I wasn't counting on it. Nothing here was ever that kind. It took about half an hour to hang all the junk from the crate onto the trader's wagon. Piece by piece, they worked in the cold, their breath fogging the air as they shifted sacks, boxes, and bundles into a rough but convincing display. Nimicie adjusted a small chest so that its iron latches caught the moonlight just so, and I draped coils of rope and canvas over the side, letting them hang loose like an overworked merchant might. By the time we stepped back to look, it was good. It looked real. A traveling trader's rig, weary but functional, heading down to Lochmoden to sell whatever scraps the road might provide. Well, that'll fool a guard or two, I muttered, brushing the frost from my gloves. Nimicie tilted her head, the corners of her mouth curling upward. It'll fool more than that, if you play your part. That was when I pulled on the costume. A woolen vest stretched across my chest, snug enough to make her eyebrows rise. I tugged up the rider's breeches, the leather stiff with age, and stamped my feet into long boots that reached to my knees. Then, with all the dignity of a jester, I placed the ridiculous puffy cap squarely on my head. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Nimicie doubled over, clutching her sides, her laughter echoing through the frosted trees. "Oh, by Alundon! You look like a bard who's been kicked out of his own tavern." I grinned, despite myself, sweeping into an exaggerated bow. "A merchant of fine taste and finer wares, my lady. Care to browse my collection of absolutely useless trinkets?" She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle another laugh, though her eyes still sparkled with mischief. Then her gaze softened. "It's missing something. Put a shirt on underneath." "Why?" I asked, feigning innocence. "You don't like the view?" Her lips quirked upward, but her voice dropped lower, warm. "I do love your bare chest, but your king's seal is showing, and that's not something we can explain away to a curious guard." I looked down at the faint, dark brand over my heart, the sigil that marked me as a man bound by oath to the king's guard. She was right. A guard at Lochmoden would know it in an instant. With a sigh, I pulled on a rough linen shirt and refastened the vest. The cap, however, I kept, if only because it made her laugh again. While I fussed with straps, Nimicie busied herself with camp. She spread a blanket near the fire pit, checked the straps of her pack, and looked over the wagon as though it might betray her in the night. When she caught me watching, she tilted her head. "Don't get too comfortable, Sergeant. You'll either be sleeping in the wagon or on the seat beside me. We'll be traveling through the night and into midday tomorrow." "Not much sleep to be had in either place," I replied. "Then you'll just have to stay awake, won't you?" she teased. I chuckled, then circled the wagon one last time, tugging at ropes, checking wheels, making sure nothing would rattle too loud. That was when I saw it. Propped against the far side, tucked neatly as if it had always been there, was a fishing pole. My breath caught. It was nothing extraordinary. Plain wood, a simple reel, but it was exactly like the one I had bought off Kelsor the first time we met. The very pole I had wanted for myself, but had instead pressed into Kylie's hands with a grin and a promise. And here it was again, leaning as though it belonged. Nimicie followed my gaze. "That wasn't here before." "No," I said slowly. "It wasn't." We stared at it for a long moment, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. Finally, I shrugged. "Curiosity for another time. For now, let's just let it be." Nimicie nodded, though her eyes lingered on the pole with the same unease curling in my gut. By the time we were ready to leave, the night was even colder, the moon higher and brighter. I climbed onto the driver's seat, gathering the reins, the wood stiff beneath my hands. Nimicie slid up beside me, tucking herself close, her head resting on my shoulder. The weight of her there, warm and steady, was worth more than any armor I'd ever worn. "Ready?" I asked quietly. She smiled without opening her eyes. "With you? Always." And with a flick of the reins, the wagon creaked forward, wheels crunching over snow, carrying us toward the long road to Lochmoden. The wagon creaked and groaned with every turn of its wheels, the old wood protesting the weight of its false cargo. Snow crunched beneath the iron rims, each sound carrying far in the still night air. For a while, neither of us spoke. It was the kind of silence that felt whole, not empty, filled with the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the whisper of the wind across the drifts. Nimicie nestled closer, her head resting against my shoulder, the length of her hair spilling down my arm in a soft, dark curtain. I breathed it in, pine smoke from the fire, a hint of lavender, and something uniquely her. She fit there perfectly, like she had always belonged at my side, and the simple act of her leaning on me warmed me more than the heavy cloak pulled across my back. "You know," she murmured after a while, her voice low and dreamy, "you don't look half bad as a merchant. That ridiculous hat almost suits you." I snorted. "Almost?" Her lips curved into a smile against my sleeve. "Almost. Though I'd rather you were bare-chested, seal or not. That shirt hides too much." I gave her a sideways glance, amused. "If I'd kept it off, we'd have had trouble at the first outpost. What would you tell the guards? Oh, don't mind him, he's just mine. Belongs to me?" She tilted her face up, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Exactly." Her laughter was soft, but it rang clear in the frozen night, a sound that banished the weight of the road ahead for a moment. I found myself grinning despite the long hours still before us. The horses huffed, their breath pluming in white clouds. I flicked the reins lightly, keeping them steady on the packed snow. Nimicie's arm slipped around my waist, her fingers tracing idle patterns across the vest as though she were writing her own secret language there. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. "Think about what?" "This. Us. The road. Where it ends." I let the question hang, watching the way the moonlight painted the world in silver and shadow. "Every day," I admitted finally. "But I've stopped worrying about the end. With you here, the road feels less like a burden, more like a beginning." She sighed, content, and I felt the weight of her relax fully against me. The wagon rocked gently, the snow hissed under the wheels, and for the first time since leaving Ironforge, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the dangerous road ahead was worth every step. The first light of morning came slowly, spilling across the mountains like molten gold poured over jagged stone. Dun Morog's peaks, so stark and white under the moon, now blushed faintly with hues of rose and amber. The frost on the trees caught fire in the glow, every branch glittering as if strung with diamonds. A breeze carried down from the ridges, sharp and cold, yet sweet with the scent of pine and fresh snow. The kind of morning that could fool you into forgetting the hardships of the road ahead. Nimicie was curled up on the driver's bench beside me, a thick blanket drawn over her shoulders, her breath rising in soft, steady rhythm. Stray strands of her hair fluttered across her cheek with each whisper of wind, and she murmured once in her sleep, shifting closer until her knee brushed mine. I smiled faintly, adjusted the reins, and let her rest. Just before the tunnel to Loch Moden, I pulled the horses to a halt. The great black maw of the mountain loomed ahead, a 5-mile throat of stone, damp and dark, waiting to swallow us whole. Better to prepare before entering. And besides, Mangleclaw would need food when he woke. I slung my bow across my back and stepped into the snow, boots sinking into the powder. The sun had just risen high enough to paint the valley floor in pale light, and already I could see the fresh trails of snow leopards etched across the drifts. Dun Morog had no shortage of them, sleek hunters, ghosting between the rocks. It wasn't long before I found one, its spotted coat blending almost perfectly with the stone and snow. The hunt was brief, efficient, and when it was done, I whispered a short prayer over the creature's still body. Dragging the kill back to the wagon, I paused at the tailgate and sighed. There was no avoiding it. Mangleclaw still lay sprawled across the wagon bed, his massive body wrapped in blankets and snores that rattled the boards themselves. He looked almost peaceful, if you could forget the size of his claws curled against the wood. Grimacing, I hoisted the carcass up and climbed carefully inside, trying not to wake him. His fur smelled faintly of pine resin and smoke from the fire the night before, and I had to squeeze past the bulk of him, pressing an arm to the wagon wall for balance. "You're a damn mountain all by yourself," I muttered under my breath. Finally, I stuffed the kill down beside his face, the snow leopard's limp muzzle nearly touching Mangleclaw's nose. The great bear didn't stir, only rumbled out a thunderous snore that made the entire wagon shudder. Satisfied, I ducked back out, shaking my head with a chuckle. By the time I settled again on the driver's seat, my stomach gave a long, hollow growl. Nimicie stirred beside me, blinking sleepily, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. She shifted, made room for me, then slid close again, tucking her head against my shoulder like she had the night before. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice still husky from sleep. About to go through the long, dark 5-mile tunnel to Loch Moden, I said, brushing a lock of hair from her cheek. Go back to sleep. We'll stop for breakfast at the trader's post on the other side. She sighed, a soft hum of contentment, and her arm slipped around my waist. Wake me when there's coffee, she murmured. I chuckled, gave the reins a flick, and the wagon groaned forward once more, rolling toward the mouth of the mountain. The light behind us dimmed, swallowed by the tunnel's vast shadow, and together we slipped into the dark. The tunnel was long, damp, and silent save for the clop of hooves and the slow, steady groan of wagon wheels echoing off stone. A lantern swung at the front, casting shaky bands of light across the walls, and Nimicie's soft breathing blended with the rhythmic rumble of Mangleclaw snoring behind us. Wrapped in darkness, with nothing but shadow and sound, my mind began to drift. I thought back to the mountain, to how strangely easy it had all seemed. Finding Mangleclaw, patching him up, even leading him down from his den, it had gone smoother than I ever dared hope. Too smooth, perhaps. Luck had been on our side, but luck was a fickle ally. I knew it couldn't last forever. A wild bear of his size, no matter how stitched and bound, could turn on us in a heartbeat. And when he did, what would that mean for my friends, for my family, for the ones I swore to protect? The image of the ranch rose in my mind. The rolling fields beneath the mountains, smoke rising from the chimney, my father's voice booming with laughter, and Cindy's endless questions as she tugged at my sleeve. Would I bring danger to them, dragging a beast like Mangleclaw into their lives? Would the Realmshifters follow? Would my choices doom them all? The reins sat loose in my hands, and I let the horses guide themselves along the center of the tunnel. Nimicie shifted against me in her sleep, her arm brushing mine, and the weight of her warmth pulled my thoughts in a different direction. Her hair smelled faintly of smoke and snow, and every time she breathed, I felt the soft rise and fall against my shoulder. I thought of the way she laughed when I wore the puffy cap, the way her eyes softened when she scolded me for not covering my seal. And I wondered, not for the first time, what our future might hold. Could we carve out a life together beyond quests and dangers? Could there be mornings at the ranch where she stood on the porch with our child in her arms, watching me return from the fields? The thought made my chest ache with a strange kind of hope, one I didn't dare voice aloud. The tunnel gave way at last to a dim glow ahead, a promise of light. As we rolled out into the open, the world was waiting, bright, sharp, and alive. Loch Moden was no frozen valley but a rare jewel, warm between mountains north and south. To the west, a huge waterfall thundered down into the basin, where a dam might yet hold strong, bridging the path across the swamp. To the far east, the mountains pressed together, cradling the valley like a hand cupped against the land. Nimicie stirred again, lifting her head with a sleepy murmur. We're out? Almost there, I said, squinting at the road ahead. 1 mile to the post. She smiled faintly, eyes half closed, and nestled back into me. The sun was warm, the air sharp, and for that one brief stretch of road, I allowed myself to believe that both dreams, the safety of my family, and a future with Nimicie, might somehow be possible. I knew of a small, hidden-away cave about a 10-minute ride from the outpost. Tucked under the slope of a ridge, where the pine trees pressed close and the rocks broke the wind. From the road, it was nothing more than a shadowed cleft in the stone. But if you knew where to look, it ran deep enough to hide a wagon and a pair of tired horses. We rolled the wagon in, the horses stamping nervously at the smell of old bear that lingered in the stone. I set the brake and unhitched the reins. There, I said, brushing the frost from my hands. It'll be safe enough till we get back. Nimicie stretched, long and graceful, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She yawned, still drowsy, and blinked against the sun. I turned to her and asked, Ride, walk, or fly? Ride, she said without hesitation, rubbing her eyes and reaching for her pack. We'd better ride our magic mount horses. Less chance of anyone nosing into our wagon. She fumbled through her purse and pulled out every last coin she had, mostly copper, a few silvers, dividing them into 2 piles. Here, she said, pressing half into my palm, gypsies rarely have gold. That made me remember. I dug into my pocket and pulled out the small gold pebbles I'd kept since our last trade. I gave her 3 and kept 2 for myself. She arched an eyebrow but didn't argue, tucking them away with a wry smile. By the time we reached the outpost, the valley was alive with sound. Dwarves bustled to and fro, traders hawked wares from painted stalls, and the smell of roasting meat drifted on the warm air. Nimicie's sharp eyes caught a vegetable stand, and she slid down from her horse with a grin. "Watch this," she whispered. The dwarf farmer behind the stand squinted as she approached. She pointed at 2 sugar beets and a small bunch of carrots. 3 copper, he grumbled. 3? For this, I'll give you 2. Nimicie folded her arms, chin lifted. The dwarf's beard bristled. 3, lass, and no less. With an exaggerated sigh, she dropped 3 copper into his hand. Fine, but only because you've such a trustworthy face. She winked, and he muttered something under his breath, though I didn't miss the twitch at the corner of his mouth. She made a show of feeding the beets and carrots to our horses right there in the street, laughing as the animals crunched happily. "See?" she said loudly. "Only the finest for our beasts, though they eat better than we do." A few passers-by chuckled, and I knew the act had worked. No one would suspect magic mounts from a pair of so-called gypsies scraping coppers together for vegetables. Next came breakfast. A squat, stone-walled tavern offered pancakes, steak, and strong coffee. Nimicie wrinkled her nose at the posted price. 10 silver for 2 breakfasts? You must think us princes, she declared to the dwarf chef. The cook only grunted, shoveled pancakes and meat into tin containers, and slapped lids on them. He thrust the bundles across the counter and pointed toward a log in the grass across from the tavern. "Eat there. I don't want your kind cluttering up my benches." Nimicie stiffened, ready to argue, but I laid a hand on her arm. "Let it be," I whispered. Better they believe the part. So we took our food to the log and unwrapped the warm bundles. The steak was tough but savory, the pancakes thick and soaked with butter. The coffee scalded my tongue but chased the morning chill from my bones. We sat side by side, chewing quietly, and I couldn't help but smile. Our disguises are working, I said around a mouthful. Nimicie leaned against me, tearing off a piece of pancake. Almost too well. After a while, an idea began to form. "The dam," I said at last. "If it's finished, we might get the wagon across. If not, maybe there's another way." I reached into my vest and handed her the purse, the coins clinking softly. "Can you shop for an hour while I scout ahead?" Her eyes narrowed. "An hour? Don't get yourself into trouble." "Never," I said with a smile. "I'll meet you back here." While I rode toward the dam, Nimicie wove through the market stalls. She haggled fiercely, her hands flying as she argued prices in fluent dwarvish, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, but never leaving empty-handed. For my father, she bought a fine box of cigars, rich and dark, worth twice what she paid. For my mother, she found a sewing basket with more needles and spools than I could count. Irene would have her blue dress, deep as the sea, and Ernie a silver map-making set gleaming under the sun. For Cindy, dolls and tiny furniture that made even the grim dwarf vendor chuckle as he wrapped them. And for me, something else. Something she tucked quickly away, her cheeks flushed, and not a word said of it. As for me, the dam was as I expected, unfinished. The dwarves had left scaffolds clinging to the stone, the great wall of rock and mortar still rising. But in the middle, a traveler's bridge had been laid across the torrent. Narrow, slick with spray, but sturdy enough if we were careful. I tested the boards underfoot and found them solid, though the roar of the waterfall below swallowed my every thought. If luck held, the wagon might cross. We might have to toss a few pots and iron kettles over the falls to lighten the load, but it could be done. Satisfied, I turned back. What I didn't know was that Nimicie had already returned to the wagon, stowing her gifts in the hidden cave. When she came back to the outpost, she bought a few more beets for her horse and 2 tankards of frothing ale. By the time I rode back into sight, she was sitting on that same log, tankard in hand, the sun warm on her face, laughing softly at nothing and everything all at once. For a moment, I simply stood and watched her, dark hair gleaming, eyes half closed in contentment, the picture of grace in the bustle of a dwarven outpost. And for that moment, the weight of bears, dams, and dangers melted away, and all I saw was her. We rattled past the outpost on the wagon, our makeshift goods tied down and swaying with every bump in the road. I raised my voice over the creak of the wheels. Wares for sale? Trinkets from the north. Rope, kettles, fine canvas, all cheap. Nimicie chimed in beside me, her voice musical despite the disguise. Carvings, iron tools, and cloth for the ladies. Don't be shy. Best deals you'll find in Lochmoden today. But the dwarves scattered. Some ducked into their shops, and others busied themselves with barrels and crates, their eyes sliding away. They wanted no part of a gypsy's wagon, and that was fine with me. The less attention, the better. Then came trouble. A man in uniform, though the buttons were loose and his cloak stained with ale, staggered into our path, hand raised. A half-drunk human, no less, with the golden crest of the Royal King's Guard glinting on his shoulder. A captain, by the look of the braid. "Hold there!" he barked, though his words slurred. He squinted at the wagon, then at us, and grinned a wolfish grin. "What have we here? A gypsy wagon? Let's see what treasures you've got." The horses shifted nervously as he lurched closer. Nimicie was off the bench in an instant, sweeping up a bolt of cloth from the side of the cart. "Good sir, finest weave this side of Stormwind. For your lady, perhaps?" I leaned down, holding up a cooking pot, polished to a dull shine. "Strong iron, cheap as coal, Captain, fit for a campfire or a castle kitchen." He snorted, unimpressed, pushing past the both of us to peer inside. And then it happened. Mangleclaw, still bundled in his wrappings, let out a snore that rattled the wagon like thunder. The captain froze, head tilting. His hand reached for the latch. Before he could touch it, I stepped in front, blocking him with my body. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Captain," I said quietly, pulling open my rider's pouch just enough to show the dark blue of the king's uniform folded inside. "You'll forgive me, but I've no choice but to take you into my confidence." His eyes narrowed, curiosity warring with drink. "Go on." I dropped my voice lower still. "We're on a mission for His Royal Majesty. A secret one. The bear inside," I jerked my head toward the wagon, "is the king's own favorite hunting beast. We've orders to deliver him north." Nimicie straightened at my side, her chin high, voice crisp with authority. "Lieutenant Nimicie, boxcar, sir, and this is Sergeant Don Zart. We're under orders." The captain studied me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he leaned in, the stink of ale thick on his breath, his lips twisted into a sneer. "Sergeant Don Zart? I fought beside Don Zart, and you, sir," he spat, hot and wet across my cheek, "are no Don Zart." Nimicie stiffened, fury flashing in her eyes, but I raised a hand to hold her back. The captain gave a loud, derisive laugh, tossing a single silver coin that clattered against the wagon wheel. "Filthy gypsy!" He reached down, snatched the fishing rod I'd been eyeing for myself since the night before, and staggered back toward his men. As he marched away, he bellowed over his shoulder, "Filthy gypsy offered me his whore for 2 silver! Like I'd bet a gypsy whore." His soldiers roared with laughter, they slapping each other's backs, and together they stumbled toward the pub, the captain waving my fishing rod overhead like a trophy. Nimicie's face burned crimson, her fists clenched. She tore after him, her braid whipping like a lash. "You son of a..." I caught her around the waist before she reached him, pulling her back against my chest. "No," I whispered fiercely into her ear, my arms tightening as she struggled. "Let me go, Don. I'll break his teeth. I'll..." "No." I turned her, holding her face in my hands. Her eyes blazed, and for a moment I thought she'd strike me instead. "He's drunk. He's a captain. His men would cut us down before you landed a blow. Do you want to risk the bear?" "The mission?" Her chest heaved, breath ragged. Finally, she sagged against me, fury trembling in every muscle. "I'll remember him," she spat, voice low. "I'll remember his name, his face. He'll get what's coming." I guided her gently back to the wagon, her curses still hot on her lips, her threats sharp enough to cut. But as I climbed into the driver's seat and set the reins, I felt the sting of spit still drying on my cheek, and the weight of a fishing rod I'd never have. The wagon rolled on, the laughter of the soldiers fading behind us, leaving only the creak of wheels and the soft, furious mutters of Nimicie beside me. The tavern's laughter faded into the background as we rolled on, but Nimicie's fury still burned hot. She muttered curses under her breath, shifting on the seat beside me like a storm about to break. After a while, she dug into her pack, pulled out a clean cloth, and dipped it into her water flask. "Hold still," she said sharply, though her hands were gentle. She dabbed at the spit drying on my cheek, her touch firm but careful. Her jaw was tight, her eyes flashing as if she could still see the captain in front of her. "What did that son of a bitch whisper to you?" she asked finally. I hesitated, then sighed. "He said he fought with Don Zart, and I am no Don Zart." Her brow furrowed, but then she surprised me with a small, fierce smile. "A compliment, really, if you think about it." I chuckled, the sound easing some of the tightness in my chest. "That's one way to look at it." She wrung out the cloth, tucked it back into her pack, and slipped her arm through mine. Her anger lingered, but it was tempered now, softened by closeness. I flicked the reins, and the wagon creaked forward, the horses drawing us toward the thunder of water. The dam loomed ahead, a half-finished wall of stone straining against the weight of the valley's waterfall. To its side, the traveler's bridge clung like an afterthought, narrow planks bolted together, slick with spray, suspended above a churning drop that could swallow 100 wagons whole. The roar of water filled the air, drowning all other sound, and my stomach tightened. "Gods help us," I muttered. The horses balked at first, hooves scraping against the slick stone of the approach. Nimicie leaned forward, whispering encouragement, her hand steady on the reins. Together we coaxed them onto the boards, the wagon wheels groaning as they rolled out over the abyss. Every creak of wood made my teeth clench. The bridge swayed with each step of the horses, the spray stinging our faces, the river raging below like an angry beast. Halfway across, the rear wheel slipped sideways against a plank and jolted the whole wagon. Mangleclaw stirred in the back, letting out a snore that rattled the boards beneath us. "Don't wake him, not now," Nimicie whispered, her grip white-knuckled on my arm. We were 3/4 of the way when I felt it, the subtle give of wood straining, nails groaning against the pull of gravity. I dared a glance back and saw it. The boards behind us buckling, nails popping loose one by one, vanishing into the spray. "Go, go!" I shouted, snapping the reins. The horses lunged, nostrils flaring, hooves hammering against the boards. The wagon lurched forward, every jolt threatening to tear the wheels loose. The last few planks screamed as the weight bore down. One wheel lifted, teetering on the edge, then slammed back onto the boards. The bridge groaned, sagged, and at that moment the rear half gave way entirely. Timber splintering, nails shrieking, the sound of wood shattering swallowed by the roar of the waterfall. The wagon jolted forward, the front wheels leaping onto solid stone, just as the last plank behind us disappeared into the torrent. The bridge collapsed in a rush of water and ruin, crashing into the depths below. For a heartbeat, we were airborne, the back wheels hanging in nothing but mist and spray. Then, with a final heave from the horses, we slammed onto solid ground. The wagon rocked, teetered, then settled with a groan of wood. Silence, except for the pounding of our hearts. Nimicie clutched my arm, breath coming fast. Her eyes were wide, shining with fear and relief all at once. "That," she whispered, "was too damn close." I exhaled slowly, staring at the wreckage tumbling in the water below. "Close," I agreed, my voice rough. "But we're through." I flicked the reins, urging the horses on. Behind us, the traveler's bridge was gone, torn away like it had never been. Ahead, the road stretched into the east, the valley opening once more, and though the danger had nearly claimed us, for now, we had survived. Finally reaching the ranch, additions to the old house that stood on the property for many years were almost done, but the barn was nothing more than a frame of new timber to Don's horror. "No, no, no, shit!" I let out as we turned towards the gate and headed to the barn. We parked in the barn, and I jumped down off the wagon, yelling, "Dad, Ernie, get off the roof and come down here," while stomping toward the house. Mom came running up to me. "Me, son, I'd like to welcome." "Hi, Ma," I said, and kissed her cheek as I rushed past. "Where's Nimicie?" she yelled. "In the barn, Ma," I said as I pointed backwards over my shoulder. I caught up with Dad and Ernie coming down the ladder from the roof with their tools. "What happened to the barn?" I said, trying to control my anger. "It was rotted, son. My dad started, and I cut him off. I've got a 2,000-pound polar bear in that wagon who's going to wake soon. if not already, and he's going to tear that wagon to bits if we keep him in there. We need to get that barn up and quick to hide him from the road. The words hung in the air for a single stunned breath. Then the ranch exploded into motion. Dad's face went from pale to set with a look I remembered from storms and stubborn mending, the look that made tools answer to his hands. He dropped his ladder rung with a curse that was half fear and half command. Tools! Boards! Nails! Move! He barked, and the yard turned into a tide of purpose. Ernie threw down his mallet and grinned, all bright energy and useless optimism, and sprinted for the lumber pile. Irene snagged the closest hammer and fell into rhythm beside him, while Mom clapped her hands and sent Cindy to fetch water and tie back stray ropes. We worked like folk possessed. Timber heaved under rough palms, ropes sang as we hauled beams into place, and the barn began to take shape under a flurry of commands and the steady rhythm of hammers. I found myself ladling orders and hauling like a man, half in muscle memory and half in panic. Get the heavy beams up first, brace the corners, cover the gaps. Nimicie moved beside me with the same fierce calm she'd shown the entire trip. When our hands met on a plank, she gave me a quick grin that steadied my breath. At one point, I was halfway up the ladder, hammer in hand, when a plank slipped underfoot and the world tipped. For a wild second, I saw the wagon, the captain's sneer, the bridge going under, and then Dad's voice, calm and clear from below. You up there, boy? Watch it. It was enough. I drove the nail true and felt it sink with a sound that steadied me like a benediction. We chewed through the afternoon in a chorus of work. Nails found wood with satisfying thunks. Sawdust bloomed in the sun and stuck to our sweat-slick skin. Nimicie and I wrestled old tarps into place, tacking them tight where the rafters still left winter's throat bare. Ernie hauled bales with a grunt and a laugh, joking that we'd charge admission to gape at the great beast, and even Mom cracked a smile between her scolds and the stacking of supper. There was a smell under all of it, fresh timber, hot iron, hay, and it felt like home being hammered out of chaos. By noon, the barn had real walls that kept out prying eyes. The roof still needed shingles and the loft pins, but we had enough shelter to hide the wagon and whatever slept beneath its quilts. We dragged the wagon carefully into the shadowed space, horses stamping and blowing steam into the cool air. The whole building seemed to exhale when the wagon rolled in. Safety, temporary, but precious. Nimicie stayed at the rear of the wagon once we were inside, kneeling with one hand on the blankets that covered Mangleclaw. When she looked up, there was a tired triumph in her face that made my chest ache with relief. There, she said softly, more to herself than anyone. Safe enough. Her fingers lingered a moment on the canvas, as if blessing the beast as much as the shelter. We ate as the work slowed, simple food handed to us on a plank bench, Mom's boiled eggs and bread, tasting like victory. Dad clapped me on the shoulder, that same heavy, warm thing that had steadied me as a boy. Good work, son, he said, and I felt the weight of his pride settle in my ribs. Ernie flopped onto a bale and let out the grin that said the day had been one good, madcap thing pulled off. Nimicie slid her hand into mine without a word, and for a long moment, the barn's half-finished rafters and the lingering scent of pine felt like proof that we could fix things, if we were quick and loud enough. When the sun tipped toward evening and the last hammer strokes died down, I found a corner and let the quiet come. The house additions by the lane gleamed in the late light, almost finished now. The barn creaked and settled around us, half shelter, half promise. Nimicie came and sat beside me, pulling her cloak tighter. Her head found my shoulder, her fingers threading with mine. What now? She asked, soft. Now, I said, squeezing her hand, we rest. Tomorrow we finish what we started. And after that, I let the rest hang between us. What of the future? Not a cliff, but a road we might walk together. She leaned into me, and for the first time in a long string of danger and narrow escapes, the next step didn't feel impossible. Outside the barn, the wind sighed through the pines. Inside, the rafters held. For tonight, that was enough. Chapter 15, Call Me Chilly Mom, had offered us a room in the house, but I shook my head. We'll stay in the barn with Mangleclaw for now. Best to keep him close. The barn smelled of new timber and resin, half built but solid enough to serve. The walls shut out the road and gave us privacy, though the wind still whistled through gaps in the boards. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe, or safe enough. With the barn secured, we stripped the wagon bare, stacking every crate and bundle along the walls. Nimicie loosened the horses from their harnesses, speaking softly as she brushed their coats and filled their troughs with hay. They nudged her shoulder, grateful, before she led them into the corner where Ernie had roughed in 2 stalls. Meanwhile, I folded down the wagon's frame and pulled away the heavy blankets covering Mangleclaw. The bear's patched hide and scarred fur shone under the lantern light, and his snores rattled the boards beneath him. Carefully, I set to work cutting away the last of the sailcloth that bound him, each slice of my knife slow and deliberate. The little potbelly stove in the corner glowed warmly, Ernie's pride from earlier that day. He'd stocked it with enough firewood to last a week, and its crackle filled the space with comfort. The orange light softened the raw timbers, turning the half-finished barn into something that almost felt like home. When Nimicie finished with the horses, she came over with the wrapped gifts balanced in her arms. "I'll take these into the house," she said. "Do you want anything?" "Take 20 gold," I told her, keeping my eyes on the knife as it whispered through canvas. "For the next few days, you, Mom, and Irene take turns picking up Cindy from school. Keep her away from the ranch until bedtime. Take her shopping, fishing, show her the Griffon post on the east side of Loch Moden, anything to tire her out. But no exploring here, not yet." Nimicie tilted her head, amused. "And one more thing," I added. "Pay Mom for one of her rams and bring it back." She laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Oh, I don't know, Don. Asking women to go on a shopping spree on your dime may take some convincing." With a giggle, she disappeared through the doors into the night. Not long after, she returned, cheeks flushed, gifts delivered, and a long-horned ram tugging reluctantly on a rope. "Everyone loved the gifts," she said proudly. "And here's your ram, on a leash, like some kind of pet." I took the rope, shaking my head. "He's not a pet, Nimicie. He's food." I led it to the back and did what had to be done. Clean and efficient. While I worked the skin free, Nimicie talked, her voice filling the space with stories. She told me how the ranch had looked when they first arrived, 4 days ago now. It was an utter mess. Fences falling, weeds taller than Cindy. We all pitched in, and little by little, it started to look like a home. Your mother showed up just yesterday from Ironforge, still grumbling about the journey, but she hasn't stopped working since she set foot here. And I had to play dolls with Cindy all evening to keep her away from the barn. You'd better go say hi to her in the morning, Dawn, if you want that to keep working. I gave a grunt of agreement, my hands busy with the knife. I will. When the work was done, I hefted the skinned ram over one shoulder, its head dangling in my other hand. Nimicie carried the hide rolled under her arm, ready to wash it outside. Together we stepped back into the main barn and froze. Mangleclaw was no longer sprawled flat. He sat upright on the wagon, massive shoulders hunched, his scarred chest rising and falling with each deep breath. One clawed paw scratched lazily at his belly, his eyes half closed but sharp, glinting in the lantern glow. For a moment the world narrowed to nothing but the sound of his breathing. Nimicie tensed beside me. Her bow came off her back in a single smooth motion, a net arrow knocked in the string. I set the ram's head down carefully, my heart hammering in my chest. The bear turned his head, regarding us with something that was not quite hunger, not quite curiosity. His ears flicked, his nostrils flared, and then, with a huff that sounded almost like a sigh, he scratched again and settled deeper onto the wagon bed. Nimicie held the bow steady, eyes never leaving him. "He's awake," she whispered, voice tight. I nodded slowly, every nerve alight. "Yeah, he's awake." And for the first time since we dragged him down from the mountain, I felt the true weight of what it meant to keep such a beast alive under our roof. Mangleclaw shifted his weight on the wagon, eyes narrowing as his gaze settled on Nimicie. His great head tilted, and then a voice rumbled out of him, deep and gravelly, like stone grinding on stone. "Stop pointing that thing at me. I'm not going to hurt anyone." Nimicie stiffened, fingers tightening on the bowstring. She repeated his words aloud for me, her voice taut. Then she answered back sharply, arrow still drawn. "We'll see." The bear gave a slow blink, then turned his gaze to me. His eyes, sharp and ancient, locked with mine. His chest expanded with a sigh that rattled the rafters. I want to thank you, my new friend, he said, his voice softer now, almost weary. I have not slept like that for I don't know how long. Nimicie's voice followed, translating so I could hear it clear. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to relax, though my heart still thundered. More than 300 years, buddy, I said quietly. I stepped forward, hefting the skinned ram onto the wagon beside him. The bear's nostrils flared, his head dipping toward the meat. Here, Ball, I muttered with a crooked smile, tossing the ram's head onto the other side. This is the last one, buddy. From now on, you want to eat, you hunt. The bear rumbled deep in his chest, an approving growl, or maybe laughter, I couldn't quite tell. I cut off 2 flank steaks and laid them across the potbelly stove, the fat sizzling as the fire licked them. The rich smell of roasting meat filled the barn, cutting through the tang of sawdust and straw. Nimicie had lowered her bow by then, though the net arrow still rested ready in her hand. Her eyes never left the bear, wary but softer now. For the first time, the tension in the barn began to ease. The 3 of us, man, woman, and beast, sharing the glow of firelight and the promise of uneasy trust. The bear gulped down the meat in a flash, his jaws working with a bone-cracking efficiency that made my skin prickle. He gave the ram's head a sniff, then lost interest, laying down with a grunt. With a lazy roll, he tipped himself right off the wagon, the old wheels squealing as the frame nearly collapsed under his weight. The floorboards shook as he lumbered forward. My hand twitched toward my knife, but instead of striking, the great beast came to sit beside me. Then, with a deep rumbling sigh, he stretched out and pressed the warmth of his body against my back, his fur coarse but comforting. It was his way of saying thank you. "Yowel, hiff, hiff," came the strange noise from his throat. Nimicie lowered her bow at last, sliding it across her back, though her fingers still lingered near the quiver. Slowly, cautiously, she walked closer. "He wants to know where we are. He says the ram tasted funny, not from his mountain, and he asks what this place is." We are on my mom and dad's ranch, buddy," I answered, shifting to lean back more comfortably against him. "We're hiding you in the barn for now." I exhaled, letting myself sink into the warmth of his flank. "Feels good to have my back against bear fur again," I added with a smile toward Nimicie. Her eyes narrowed in mock disgust. "Yeah, well, I'll stay over here for a while if you don't mind." "Hiff," came the rumble from Mangleclaw. Nimicie tilted her head, listening. "He says, speaking of your back, are you okay, my new friend?" I chuckled softly, reaching down to pat his coarse fur. "I'm fine, buddy. Luckily, you got me in the same spot as before, and that area has fewer nerves now. After the first bout of pain, it went away." Nimicie came closer this time. She leaned me forward, tugged my shirt up, and frowned at the scar. Then she swatted the bear's shoulder. "Look what you did! He was just coming to help you." Mangleclaw blinked slowly, unbothered, as Nimicie released my shirt and shoved me against his furry side. She crossed her arms, tapping her foot with exaggerated irritation. "Hiff," came another low rumble. Nimicie's expression softened, her voice gentler. "Nimicie. My name is Nimicie, and yes, I do love him very much." "Yowl, hiff, hiff, yowl," answered the bear. Her mouth fell open, then curved into a disbelieving laugh. "Why, you sneaky bear, thank you for telling me, though." She turned to me, eyes shining. "He says he knows we love each other very much. While he pretended to be asleep, he would listen to us talk. And you'd tell him stories about you and this other bear, Chili." The words hit me hard, stirring something deep. My throat tightened, a tear springing to the corner of my eye. "He said," Nimicie went on softly, "he wished he had a friend like you. And he wished he was Chili." I swallowed, placing a hand firmly against his thick hide. "You are, buddy. In my realm, you are." "Hiff." His tongue rasped against the back of my head in a wet, clumsy lick that made Nimicie burst out laughing. "He says you owe him a story," she translated, grinning. "You were going to tell him how he got his name, Chili." "Aye. Would you be liking to hear the story, me friend?" I started in a thick dwarven burr, grinning. Nimicie balled her fist at me, her eyes narrowing. "Don, I swear to God." Okay, English it is," I said, chuckling. I spun onto my side and leaned against Mangleclaw's flank, resting my head on his fur. Nimicie, not to be ignored, came and sat by the bear's head, scratching gently behind his ears as I began the tale. Now let me see. We were hiking through your mountains, headed for the swampland on the other side. We didn't come here the first time. Too bitter cold, too high of peaks. But I had to keep you out of sight. For 3 long days, we trekked through those unforgiving cliffs until at last we reached the dockyards on the far side. I bribed the captain of a small ship to take us north to Grizzly Hills. There's a King's Guard post there, the place where they train their animals. I shot Nimicie a glance. You did not hear that part. Her lips twitched, but she said nothing, just kept scratching at the bear's ear. Anyway, I went on, when we arrived, I got us in with a little white lie. I'm here to train His Majesty's favorite hunting companion. This was just after the old king had died, before I was ever assigned to Anduin. That lie could have cost me my head. I gave a short laugh. Well, word got back to the new king, Anduin, just a boy of 14 at the time, that the world's biggest bear was his favorite hunting companion. He'd never been hunting in his life, though he wanted to. So he jumped on his griffin, Sir Farts-a-lot, if you can believe it, and flew all the way north to see us, with 20 guards scrambling to catch up. He arrived just in time to watch you gulp down a full mountain stag, one bite, gone. Mangleclaw huffed through his nose at that, as though amused. The boy king came right up to me, chest puffed out, and barked, "Give him another one, Sergeant!" I snapped to attention and said, "Sorry, Your Majesty, I do not have another one." He frowned, then looked around at all the guards watching. You could see the panic rising in him. He'd made an order and couldn't back down. So he shouted, "My bear is hungry! A pouch of gold and a week's leave to the first 10 guards who bring me a kill as big or bigger than that one." I laughed, remembering it clearly. Well, chaos erupted. Griffin riders were swooping off the cliffs, snatching live bucks and dropping them at your paws as fast as you could swallow them. I eased the boy back, hand on his shoulder, trying to keep him from getting too close. He hissed at me. "Touching the king?" "You could lose your head for that, Sergeant." And I said, "So could you, Your Majesty," nodding at the way you were tearing through those kills. Nimicie snorted, covering her mouth with her hand. For a whole day it went on. Stags, sheep, wolves, even a few bears, rained down into the courtyard. The guards were cheering, betting against you, saying you couldn't eat the next one. Until finally, mid-meal, you fell asleep right there, half a haunch still in your jaws. The sheep beside you keeled over from sheer fright, dead of a heart attack. I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. And the boy king raised his arms and shouted, "Your King's Guard polar bear." The courtyard erupted with cheers, drowning out your snores. Then he turned to me, all pride and bravado, and demanded, "What is his name, Sergeant?" I didn't dare tell him your true name, Mangleclaw, so I said, "He hasn't been named yet, Your Majesty." The king ordered me to fix that. I shook my head, smiling at the memory. An hour later, a major came up with new orders. I was to spend 6 months at the post, training you as a King's Guard companion, and then report to the palace as the boy king's personal guard. I shifted on the straw, leaning harder into Mangleclaw's fur. The next day, I was on the docks, fishing, leaning against you, trying to think of a name. A little girl, couldn't have been more than 10, walked up to us, arms full of blankets, no fear in her at all. "Mister," she said, "you and your bear look cold. I brought you 2 blankets from my daddy's wagon, only 30 silver each." Nimicie chuckled, shaking her head in wonder. I laughed, amazed at her bravery, and handed her a gold coin. "Keep the change," I told her. She squealed with delight, gave me my blanket, and tucked the other over you, scratching your head as if you were no more dangerous than a barn cat. "There you go, cold bear," she said. "That'll warm you up. What's your bear's name, mister?" I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. And right there it came to me. "His name is Chili, Sweetness." I let the silence hang, broken only by the pop of the stove and the deep rhythm of the bear's breathing. "And that is how you got your name." Just then, my mother came into the barn carrying 2 plates of food and a pair of tankards sloshing with mead. She set them down on a hay bale, still fussing with her apron, and turned to speak. Only then did her eyes fall on the great white bear. She gasped, hand to her chest. "Oh, Chili, you poor thing! All those arrowhead scars." She shook her head fiercely. I'll go fetch my new sewing kit. No, Mom, I barked, striding over in a panic. I dropped to one knee, catching her hands before she could storm out. Looking her square in the eye, I said firmly, He don't know ye, Ma. He's a new bear, and not your Chili. Bethane Hammersmith Zart narrowed her eyes, shoved me aside with a strength that had cowed me since childhood, and marched straight to Mangleclaw. Without hesitation, she got down on her knees in the straw, cupped the beast's scarred cheeks in both hands, and spoke to him as if he were a misbehaving boy caught in the kitchen. I am your new human mother, she declared. I'll be loving you like me own son. But if you kill my sheep, I'll be having you as a rug. And if you try to eat me, I'll climb down your throat and gut you from the inside. From her bodice, she drew the small knife she always carried, flashing it under his nose to prove her point. Mangleclaw gave a low, surprised huff, and then his great blue tongue lolled out and dragged wetly across her face. Oh. Hiff! That was it. Mom bolted upright, apron yanked over her face to hide her tears, and fled out the barn doors. Nimicie collapsed onto the floor, rolling in the straw, clutching her stomach as gales of laughter shook her. At last, gasping between fits, she managed to choke out, He said, Call me Chili, Ma. The barn rang with her laughter, the fire snapped in the stove, and for the first time since bringing him down the mountain, the name Chili felt like it belonged. Chapter 16. Morning Fare. We sat in the barn with our supper, the warmth of the little potbelly stove chasing the chill from the half-finished rafters. Nimicie and I ate off tin plates, the smell of roasted ram still heavy in the air. Chili stirred from where he'd been sprawled, gave a mighty yawn, and heaved himself up onto his paws. The whole building seemed to shift with his weight. He padded first to the water troughs, lowering his enormous head. In a few gulps, both his and the horses were drained dry. He'd not had a drink in days, and the sound of his slurping echoed like someone emptying barrels down a well. Then, nose twitching, he found a corner of the barn where the wall boards gapped enough to let in air. He settled there, grumbled, and relieved himself, steam rising in the cool draft. When he returned, he lumbered back to the stove and collapsed beside it with a heavy whump. The floor creaked, dust drifting from the rafters. Hiff yowl hiff, came the deep rumble from his throat. Nimicie glanced up from her plate, amused. Oh, he's talking to you, Don. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, shifting to face him. Yes, buddy. Nimicie, translate, please. Chili grunted again, longer this time. Hiff hiff yowl hiff. Nimicie set down her plate, her expression sharpening with interest. That's a good question, Chili. I'll ask. She looked at me, eyes bright. He wants to know, that little girl in your story, what are the chances that was a very young Kylie? I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I knew the surprise showed plain on my face, memories crowding in at once. I frowned, shook my head slowly. No, Kylie is only 20 now. That happened more than 30 years ago, a little longer than that. But my voice was tight, and even to myself I didn't sound entirely sure. How do you know about Kylie? I asked, my tone more shocked than I intended. Hiff? Nimicie grinned, tilting her head toward the bear. Just because he's snoring doesn't mean he's asleep. I shot Chili a narrow look, and Nimicie laughed outright. He's a sneaky bear, she shouted across the barn at him. Chili's only answer was a deep rumble that might have been laughter. Then he curled his paws tighter beneath him and blinked slowly like a cat. We finished our meal, the last bits of meat and bread, and I carried my tankard of ale over to him. I sat with my back against his massive side, the warmth of his fur soaking into me as though he were a living hearth. All right, buddy, I said softly, let's talk. And I told him about Kylie. About the first time I'd met her, young and sharp-eyed, how she'd grown into the stubborn fighter she was. I spoke of Floggin's great female bear, the counterpart to Chili's other self, and how love had found even those two beasts in the wild. Nimicie joined me, slipping under my arm and leaning her head against my shoulder. She looked at the bear with affection and asked aloud if he minded her sharing the warmth of his fur. He rumbled, a deep sound that vibrated through the boards. Apparently, Nimicie said with a smile, his answer is, of course not. Your family. Sister? So the three of us stayed like that, tucked in around the stove, trading stories through the night. Chili and I bonded over the shared ache of fathers who had lost their families. Nimicie told him about her own father, about the dangers her sister now faced. It was a night of honesty and strange communion. Somewhere in that long conversation, a pact was made. Chili agreed to help us in our fight, on one condition: all magic users were his to deal with. His hatred for them ran bone deep, born of some old grief he only half spoke of, and he offered his claws freely. That's probably why his counterpart took a chunk out of Valdor's ass, Nimicie said wryly, and even Chili gave a low growl that carried the edge of satisfaction. I listened, learning new things about this beast at my side, old truths about the friend I thought I already knew. We talked until Nimicie's head grew heavy against my shoulder, her breathing slow and even. After she drifted to sleep, I kept speaking, telling stories until at last even Chili's great breaths smoothed into slumber. By the time dawn crept into the barn, a pale light through the half-finished roof, my eyes felt raw and gritty. I rose quietly, careful not to wake them. The mountain clung to me still, the sweat, the blood, the grime. I needed to shed it. In the house, I found the kitchen already warm with the scent of bread. Mom was there, bustling at the stove, apron tied, humming under her breath. In the washroom, a surprise awaited me. A fresh towel, bar of soap, and my razor laid neatly by the tub. Behind me came the creak of the door, and there was Mom herself, carrying 2 steaming buckets of hot water. She set them down with a proud clatter. "Do I be known my son, or what?" she said, chin tilted up, eyes twinkling. I couldn't help but laugh. Stripping down, I sank into the tub as she poured. 4 buckets of hot, 4 of warm, steam rising thick enough to blur the glass. The water closed around me, washing away weeks of travel, the stench of blood and battle. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the mountain run off me in rivulets. I guess I stunk more than I realized. Steam curled from the wash basin as I scraped the last pass of the razor across my jaw. The hot water had worked its magic. Muscles loose, the grime of the mountains scrubbed away, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like a man again instead of a beast dragging his own shadow. The quiet didn't last long. Dad's heavy tread sounded first in the kitchen, a cough and the scrape of a chair as he sat down. Ernie came stumbling after, boots half-laced, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Irene followed close behind, her hair in a loose braid, apron tied neat even though she'd barely woken. The smell of frying bacon and fresh bread had pulled them all from their beds. Then came the thunder. The bathroom door banged open, and little Cindy burst in like a hurricane, her hair wild from sleep. I had just stepped out of the tub, towel around my waist, razor in one hand. She flung herself forward, wrapping her arms around me. "Uncle Don!" she squealed, squeezing me tight. "Light's mercy!" I cursed, nearly slitting my own throat as the razor slipped. I caught it in time, my heart thumping harder than it had in battle. She peered up at me with wide eyes, completely unfazed. "Did you bring me something? Did you? Did you? What about Auntie Nimicie? And is it true you fought a dragon? Did you really ride a griffin? Are you going to take me fishing today? Why are you naked?" The questions came in a flood. I bent, kissed the top of her head, and steered her gently toward the door, before I ended up bleeding out in the washroom. "Go on, troublemaker. Breakfast first, stories later." She ran off giggling, her little voice carrying down the hall. "Uncle Don's naked in the bathroom." By the time I made it to the kitchen, shaved, clean, and dressed in my uniform, the table was nearly groaning under the weight of food. Mom had outdone herself. Bacon crisp and curling, eggs golden, hot rolls stacked high, a platter of sliced fruit that gleamed in the morning light. The scent of strong coffee filled the air. Nimicie stumbled in last, hair tousled, eyes heavy from the night before. She gave me a tired but radiant smile as she sank into the chair beside mine. Cindy, already munching on a roll with jam smeared across her cheek, tugged at Nimicie's sleeve and peppered her with questions too. Questions we were careful to steer far from anything that slept in the barn. The talk at the table was the usual Zart chaos. Dad grumbled about the unfinished roof on the barn. Ernie swore he'd finish the north wall by sundown. Mom swatted his hand away from the bacon platter 3 times, and Cindy chattered so quickly no one could keep up. Nimicie played along with her, inventing grand answers about griffins and dwarves that made the child's eyes go wide with wonder. For a while, it was almost ordinary. Almost. As I reached for another slice of bread, Irene leaned close, her voice low so only I could hear. I've got Cindy after school today. Don't worry, I'll keep her busy. I glanced sideways at her, caught the glint of mischief in her eye. She added, and thank you for the new shoes and hat you're going to buy me. I couldn't help it. I chuckled, shaking my head. You drive a hard bargain. She winked, returning to her eggs as if nothing had been said. The table buzzed on with talk, laughter, and the clatter of dishes. Outside, the day was brightening, the smell of pine drifting through the open window. For just a little while, with family around me and the weight of the mountains washed clean, it felt like life was simple again. After breakfast, the household scattered into its daily rhythm. Ernie clattered the buckboard around front, Cindy bouncing with excitement as he helped her climb up. She waved furiously at the porch, calling out every little plan for her day at school, none of which anyone understood through her torrent of words. Hold tight now, lass, Ernie said, clicking the reins. The wagon creaked off down the lane, Cindy still waving until they were nothing but a dust cloud behind the fence line. Nimicie watched them go with a fond smile, then turned to Irene. Take the horses this afternoon, she said, handing over the reins of the two magic mounts. Cindy will love the ride to the trading post after school. Irene's face lit up with gratitude as she accepted them. She'll never forget this, Nimicie. With the house quiet, I caught Dad's eye. Come on, there's someone you need to meet. His brow furrowed, but he followed me out to the barn. Nimicie came too, bow in hand, translator, guardian, and stubborn partner in every step. Inside, Chili was sprawled across the straw, one paw twitching as if he were still chasing something in a dream. He rumbled when we entered, great head lifting to regard us with sleepy curiosity. Easy, big fella, I said, patting his shoulder as I knelt beside him. Dad, this is Chili. Dad crossed his arms, sizing the bear up with the same stern glare he'd used on me as a boy. Big as a wagon and twice as likely to eat it. Chili huffed, his lips curling back in something close to a grin. Nimicie tilted her head, listening, then repeated aloud, He says he doesn't want trouble. He just needs to know the rules. That's fair, I said, standing straighter. All right, buddy. Rule number 1, stay inside the fence. If you wander too far, you'll get hit with arrows or buckshot from the neighbors, and I won't be able to stop it, Dad added. And rule number 2, stay away from Bethane's sheep, or she'll have your hide nailed to the wall. Chili's deep rumble shook the rafters, a grudging sound of agreement. Satisfied, Dad clapped my shoulder. Good enough. He's your problem now, son. Then he grabbed his tools and went off to tackle the roof again, muttering about shingles and wasted daylight. With him gone, Nimicie and I led Chili out the back of the barn. We walked the 2 miles of tree line that bordered the ranch, pointing out the boundary where forest met fence. This is yours, I told him. After Cindy goes to school in the mornings, you can come out, hunt, fish, stretch your legs. Just be back by the time she returns. And remember, no sheep. He listened, massive head swiveling with each landmark we pointed to. I reached into the pack slung at my side and pulled out the sheep's head from the night before, still wrapped. With a grin, I tossed it high into the air. Look, Chili! Ball! The great bear bounded after it like a cub, snow scattering under his paws as he leapt and caught it midair. He landed with a grunt, rolled once in the grass, and came up shaking the thing in his jaws with a playful huff. Nimicie laughed, her hand slipping into mine as we turned back toward the ranch house, leaving him to his new game. Halfway there, I slowed, the weight of duty tugging at me. Nimicie, I have to go see the king. I'll be back in a day or two. I'll check in with Valdor, make sure your sister's still safe and sleeping. Her fingers tightened on mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke, just walked. At last, she said softly, I don't like it when you go, but I know why you must. We stopped at the paddock where the black griffin waited, feathers gleaming like midnight silk. She had bought him for me, stubborn and secretive about the price, and every time I mounted the beast, I felt her care in it. I kissed her forehead, then swung into the saddle. She rested her hands on the griffin's wing, looking up at me with that quiet fire in her eyes. Be safe, she said. Always, I promised. With a squeeze of my knees, the griffin spread its wings, the wind of its power kicking up dust. A moment later, we were airborne, the ranch falling away beneath me as Stormwind's distant spires called me south. Behind me, Nimicie brushed the hair from her face, squared her shoulders, and strode toward the barn. Kitchen work was never her calling. Today, she would help Dad and Ernie raise the rafters, her bow hung at her back, and her laughter rising with the sound of hammers. The half-finished barn echoed with voices and the rhythmic thud of nails driving home. Sawdust hung in the air like golden mist, drifting in the shafts of sunlight through the rafters. Bethane came out to the yard with a basket of bread and a jug of water, shaking her head at the racket. "You'll be having it up before sundown, or you'll be sleepin' under the stars yourselves," she scolded, though her smile betrayed her pride. Nimicie wiped sweat from her brow, traded a grin with Ernie, and lifted another timber into place. She had never been one to stand idle while work was to be done, and on this morning she was as much a Zart as any of them. Inside the barn, Chili stirred from where he lay and gave a rumbling huff, content to watch through half-lidded eyes as the family hammered and hauled. For the first time since the long trek down from the mountain, the ranch felt alive with rhythm and purpose. Man, woman, and beast settling into the work of a new life together. Chapter 17. Orders. The sun was sinking toward early afternoon by the time I reached Stormwind. The palace rose high above the city, white stone towers gleaming in the light, banners snapping against the breeze. My black griffin carried me straight to the eyrie at the palace peak, talons clattering as he settled onto the eagle's berth. I dismounted, ran a hand over his dark feathers, and left him to the care of the keepers. The descent into the palace was a contrast of echoing corridors, marble floors, and the murmur of politics already at work. By the time I reached the great hall, the air was heavy with words. His Majesty sat in his throne, flanked by an entourage of lawyers, scribes, and dignitaries. Scrolls rustled, arguments overlapped, and the drone of diplomacy filled the vaulted chamber. But the moment the king spotted me at the far doors, he raised a hand. 2 minutes, gentlemen. Court is adjourned for now." His voice cut through the noise, and all the chatter ceased. His eyes locked on me. "Come in, Sergeant." I moved quickly, boots echoing on stone. At the foot of the dais, I bowed low. "Your Majesty." "Rise," said the king, his young face sharp with both command and impatience. He leaned back, hands resting on the arms of the throne. "Is this important, Sergeant?" "Not especially, Your Majesty," I admitted, straightening. "I was hoping to catch you alone." I dipped another quick bow. "Good." A hint of a grin tugged at his mouth. "Then an informal dinner, cigars and ale in my den tonight. 6-ish? "It would be my honor, Your Majesty." I bowed again, less formal but no less sincere. "Good, then." He flicked his hand with mock irritation. "Now get out of here before you catch your death of boredom, Sergeant." A ripple of amusement ran through the chamber. I snapped to attention, pivoted on my heel, and marched out. Section 3. The marble corridors fell quiet behind me as I made my way down to the council chambers. The next stop was Valdor. If there was any news about Lola, Nimicie's sister, I needed to hear it from him. At his office, I rapped my knuckles on the heavy oak door before easing it open. "You knocked!" Valdor's voice rose in disbelief. He looked up from a cluttered desk, eyebrows climbing. "Who are you, and what have you done with my rude friend Don?" I stepped inside, smiling despite myself. "Good to see you, old friend." He waved me to a chair with a snort. "Come then, sit. What's dragged you in here pretending to be polite?" I lowered myself into the seat across from him, leaning forward. "I came to see if there was any news about Nimicie's sister." The smile faded from his face. His shoulders sank, and his voice dropped lower. "She still sleeps, I'm afraid, guarded by at least 20 undead soldiers in the Undercity." A cold weight settled in my chest. "Where in the Undercity exactly?" Valdor spread his hands. "Of course I've never been there myself. But according to this..." He clapped his hands sharply. At once, a great vellum scroll shimmered into existence, unrolling itself across his desk. The map of Lordaeron and its poisoned heart stretched out in front of us, edges glowing faintly with enchantment. The Undercity's twisted tunnels and rings were inked in deep black lines, spiraling inward like a spider's web. Valdor leaned over it, a finger tracing the route. "Here," he said grimly, "the Battlemaster's chamber. Furthest point from the only entrance into the city. If they wanted to make her rescue as difficult as possible, they've succeeded." His fingertip pressed hard into the parchment, and the inked lines shimmered before an X seared itself into place, glowing faintly red. I studied it in silence. The distance, the choke points, the sheer depth of the place. It would be a nightmare to breach. But at least now, I knew where she was. Valdor rolled the map back with a flick of his hand and offered it to me, parchment now cool and ordinary again, the faint glow of magic gone. "Take it," he said. "You'll need it." I accepted the scroll with a slow nod, tucking it into my belt. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he muttered. "Just get her back. And try not to get yourself killed in the process." I rose from the chair, the map heavy at my side, and clasped his forearm in farewell. His grip was firm, his eyes steady, but behind them I saw the same shadow of worry that lived in me. The Undercity. The thought of it sat like lead in my gut. And Nimicie's sister, waiting in its black heart. After lifting a few ales with Valdor in his cluttered office, I felt the weight of sleepless nights finally dragging at me. The map he'd shown me was still rolled and tucked at my side, its warning echoing louder than the clink of mugs, but even worry couldn't fight exhaustion forever. "I'll be no good to anyone half dead on my feet," I admitted, rubbing at my face. "I'm going to see if I can stretch out in the guard's house for a few hours." Valdor smirked into his ale. "Try not to snore so loud you wake the whole barracks." I left him chuckling and crossed through the palace corridors to the familiar timber of the guard's house. A private on duty stood tall by the entryway, his eyes snapping forward as I approached. "Sergeant Zart," he said crisply. "At ease, Private. Do me a favor, wake me at 5:30. "Yes, Sergeant." The bunk wasn't much. Thin mattress, stiff blanket. But the moment I stretched out, I was gone. The world blinked away in an instant, and I'm certain the entire barracks knew by the way I snored. At exactly 5:30, the guard shook me awake. I thanked him, still groggy but grateful, then made my way to the washroom. A hot bath steamed the aches out of my bones, and the razor scraped away more than stubble. It scraped off the road, the dust, the lingering edge of fatigue. By the time I pulled on my uniform and tightened my belt, I felt almost like myself again. I crossed the palace toward His Majesty's private den. The oak door stood tall and polished, brass handle gleaming in the lamplight. I knocked once. "Enter," came the king's voice. Inside, Anduin sat comfortably in his den, a room more homely than regal, lined with shelves and a low fire crackling in the hearth. Valdor was already there, relaxed in one of the armchairs, and another figure I recognized immediately. Captain Rob Woods. "Ah, Don, come in, sit," the king said warmly. "I've invited Captain Woods and Valdor to join us. I hope that's all right?" "Of course, Your Majesty," I said with a grin, glancing at the two men. "Valdor, Captain Woods? It's good to see you both." I took my seat, the leather chair creaking as I settled. The king's eyes sparkled with mischief. "So, food or ale first, gentlemen?" "Ale!" All three of us barked back, almost in unison, and the room erupted in laughter. The king himself poured, passing each of us a tankard. I raised mine toward Captain Woods. "So, Captain, word in the guardhouse is you took on a huge female bear on your hunting trip, pushed the king out of the way, and got a backhand for your trouble?" I said with a teasing smile. The king arched a brow, feigning innocence. "Oh, I have no idea how these rumors get started, do you, Valdor?" "Not a clue, Your Majesty," Valdor said smoothly, though the grin tugging at his mouth betrayed him. He sipped his ale, eyes glinting with amusement. Captain Woods and I both looked between the two of them, then at each other, and broke into chuckles. "Well," I said, lifting my mug, "at least I'm not marrying that bear." Captain Woods laughed loud enough to rattle the glasses. "I wouldn't argue too much with your woman, Sergeant. Take it from me, she hits hard!" The king laughed with us, but before the moment could stretch, a firm knock came at the door. "Ah," Anduin said, smiling knowingly. "Gentlemen, our fifth, come." The door opened to reveal Major Alex Boyd of the King's Guard. Instinct snapped me and Captain Woods to our feet. We stood at attention until the king waved us down. "Gentlemen," Anduin said as he crossed to greet him, "for tonight, let's do away with titles. I'm Anduin, Alex Boyd. May I present Valdor, Captain Rob Woods, and our entertainment for the evening, Sergeant Don Zart." He ushered Boyd in with a hand on his shoulder, then pressed a tankard of ale into his hands. Alex's eyes landed on me. "I know your father, son. Good man." Pride swelled in my chest. "Thank you, Alex. I've always liked him." I reached into my satchel and offered him a cigar. The men chuckled as Boyd waved it off. "Oh no, Don. After dinner, please. Besides, Anduin's bragged he's got the best cigars in the kingdom waiting for us. The king smirked at that, lifting his chin with pride. He clapped his hands, and servants flowed in like a tide, carrying platters heavy with food, roast venison, steaming potatoes, bowls of bright vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. The scents filled the den until it felt more like a festival than a supper. We sat together, tearing into the feast, laughter filling the air as easily as smoke. The king was no monarch at that table, just Anduin, a man among men, sipping ale and telling tall tales. Valdor's sharp wit drew roars of laughter. Woods's dry humor cracked the silence between courses. Boyd's measured comments brought the weight of perspective. I reached into my pouch and held up a small bundle of cigars, 6 in all. But Anduin, these are yours, the last of a box you gave me in my realm. The king's eyes lit, and he plucked one straight from my hand. Thank you, Don. Oh, and you'd better start referring to this realm as your realm if you don't want your head cut off for witchcraft, he warned with a wink. The table laughed, mugs lifted, cigars promised for later. By the time the plates were cleared, we were no longer sergeants, captains, or kings, just men, sharing food, drink, and stories that blurred rank into camaraderie. When the servants finally withdrew and the den fell quiet, but for the crackle of fire, we retired to the lounge area. There, more ale was poured, cigars lit, and the laughter rose again into the night. For those hours, the world outside the den could wait. The feast had settled into a comfortable rhythm, mugs clinking, laughter bouncing between the paneled walls, the air fragrant with roasted meat and wood smoke. It was the king himself who shifted the mood with that mischievous gleam in his eye. Don, Anduin said, leaning forward, elbow propped on the table, why don't you tell us how you and Lieutenant Nimicie bagged Mangleclaw? Alex, he turned to Major Boyd. You'll appreciate this. They were gone barely 2 hours. Then Nimicie, stinking of smoke and swamp, stormed back into camp foul as thunder, declaring they'd bagged the beast. The king chuckled into his ale. And the camp still hasn't recovered. Rob Woods laughed and jabbed a thumb at the purple mark blooming on his cheek. I believe it. That woman hits harder than a smith's hammer. The table roared, and I lifted my hands in mock surrender. All right. You want the tale? You'll have it. I leaned back, let the silence hang just long enough to whet their appetites, then began weaving it slow, savoring every pause. I told them of the snow-choked slopes, of the first rumble that shook the ground beneath us, of the sudden blur of white fur and claws like scythes. I painted the picture as though they'd been there, the stink of the beast's breath, the sting of frost in our lungs, the way the mountains themselves seemed to hold their breath. Truth be told, I admitted, lifting my mug, I owe my hide to Nimicie. She saved my ass. I was one swipe from being torn in half when she netted him, bold as any knight with a dragon at his throat. I stood, tugged at my tunic, and turned, lifting the hem high enough to show the jagged claw marks raked across my back. The gasps and low whistles around the table were satisfying, though Valdor only shook his head, unimpressed as ever. Souvenir, I said dryly. Hurts less than it looks. When I sat again, I carried the tale forward. How Nimicie and I had worked side by side through the long hours afterward, digging arrowheads out of the bear's thick hide. Blood soaking our sleeves, the beast groaning like a mountain shifting in its sleep. How we'd bribed a dwarf king with gold heavier than a saddlebag to look the other way. How we'd lashed the bear to a flying platform, praying every rope and spell would hold as we drifted down toward waiting ground. I told them how the buckboard stood ready below, dressed with tarps and pots and all the junk of gypsies on the road, and how we rode that rattling disguise through dwarven lands with the bear hidden beneath, hearts hammering with every guard's glance. And somehow, I finished, raising my mug, we made it to my father's ranch without losing the beast, our lives or our cover, though I'll not claim my nerves survived the journey. The table hummed with approval. Major Boyd leaned forward, eyes sharp and intent. Remarkable, he said simply. The king's grin turned sly. Alex, I thought you'd appreciate it. Our good major here, he gestured with his mug, runs the King's Guard Companion Training Program. Every wolf, hawk, hound, and beast sworn to our banner has passed under his eye. That brought every gaze back to Boyd. He studied me, then leaned back in his chair. And now a bear. Not just a bear, Valdor muttered. A damned legend. Boyd ignored him. If he's to serve, he'll need training. 6 months minimum, Sergeant, for both the animal and the handler. Maybe longer. The king barked a laugh. 6 months? I've no patience for 6 months. I want him qualified in 1. Boyd's brow shot up. 1, Your Majesty, this isn't a hunting dog we're talking about. This is a 2,000-pound predator who nearly gutted your sergeant. I lifted a hand. Still here, I said mildly, but no one seemed to hear me. The two of them leaned into the debate like blacksmiths at an anvil. 1 month, Alex, Anduin pressed. Don can handle him. 6, Boyd shot back flatly. 2, countered the king, a grin tugging at his mouth. 5, Boyd said, stone-faced. 3, Anduin cut in, eyes narrowing in challenge. Boyd held the gaze for a long, taut moment, then inclined his head. 3 months, intensive. Don, Nimicie if she wishes, and the bear. They'll sweat, bleed, and maybe survive it. At the end, you'll have a King's Guard companion or a burial mound. Nothing in between. The king laughed, slapping the table. Spoken like a true officer. 3 months it is. He turned to me, the weight of command sliding back into his tone. Come back in the morning, Sergeant. I'll have your orders drawn up, and you can accept Lieutenant Nimicie's on her behalf, and I'll give you something fit to hang on a wall. He paused, a wicked twinkle in his eye. Assuming you ever buy a house for your woman. The table erupted with chuckles, Valdor choking on his ale, Boyd shaking his head with a rare smile. I just sat back, sipping deep, wondering how Nimicie would take the news. But one thing was certain, Chili had just been drafted. The fire in the king's lounge had burned low, embers pulsing faintly in the grate. I awoke groggy on one of his long couches, the leather soft enough to trap me deeper than I'd meant to sleep. My head throbbed faintly with the memory of too much ale, but the warmth of the place had dulled the edge. Across from me, Anduin himself was sprawled on the opposite couch, one arm draped over his chest, breathing slow and even. Valdor had collapsed in a high-backed chair nearby, chin on his chest, an empty mug still clutched in his hand. He snored gently, muttering every now and then in the half-language of dreams. Rob Woods and Major Boyd were nowhere to be seen. With a faint grin, I pieced together a vague memory of the two of them, arms looped across each other's shoulders, staggering out the door in search of ladies of the evening. Their laughter had echoed down the corridor long after. Careful not to wake the others, I pushed myself upright and slipped quietly from the den. At the guard's house, I washed the night away. A proper bath, a clean shave, and a crisp uniform, simple things that did wonders to put a man back together. By the time I straightened the collar and brushed a hand over the polished buttons, I was Sergeant Zart again, not just Don stumbling home from the king's den. I gave it an hour, letting the palace wake, then made my way back to the great hall. The doors groaned as the guards swung them open. Sunlight streamed through high windows, spilling across the marble floor, and the king's throne set high on its dais. The air carried the faint scent of incense, sharp and clean, meant to chase away the odor of politics. 2 guards flanked me as they escorted me forward. I stepped briskly to the foot of the throne, boots ringing against stone, and dropped into a deep bow. Rise, Anduin said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. When I straightened, he'd already stepped down 2 stairs from the throne, closing the distance. His eyes were sharp now, no trace of last night's haze. Your orders? And the lieutenant's, Sergeant, he said, handing me 2 sealed envelopes, heavy with wax. I accepted them with a bow, tucking them under my arm as he returned to the throne. Settling into his seat again, he looked to the side. Major, if you would. From the far side of the dais, Major Boyd stepped forward. Tucked beneath his arm was a scroll unlike any I had ever seen. The parchment itself was thick and white, edged with hammered silver. Golden cords tied it closed, their tassels capped with tiny brass shields bearing the sigil of the lion. As he untied it, the seals cracked like breaking ice. He unrolled it with ceremony, the stiff parchment gleaming as it caught the light. Holding it high, he read in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. This honor is requested at His Majesty's command to have Chili Zart and his handler, Sergeant Donald Jonathan Zart, join the King's Guard Animal Companion branch of His Majesty's service, the King's Guard. If agreed and completed by the inductees, signed below, they shall hold full rights and honors of any King's Guard. The last words echoed, bouncing against the stone, as though the hall itself had judged them worthy. Boyd rolled the scroll partway closed, snapped it against his chest, then saluted sharply. First the king, then me. He He took 2 precise steps toward me, stomped once, and held the parchment open against his breastplate. In his other hand, he offered me a pen, its nib already inked. The hall went silent. I came to attention, saluted the king, then stepped forward. Accepting the pen, I bent over the parchment and signed my name in firm strokes. The black ink gleamed for a heartbeat, then sank into the page as if claimed by it. Straightening, I saluted the major, handed back the pen, and stepped back into place. Boyd pivoted smartly, raising the scroll high. "Witness!" he barked. The line of king's guards behind the throne, each one no less than a lieutenant, snapped to attention. As one, they raised their swords in salute. Their voices rang together, strong enough to shake the rafters. "I so witness!" The sound hit me like a drumbeat in the chest. The major lowered the scroll, saluted the guard, then the king, then turned on his heel once more. He faced me, saluted sharply, and thrust the scroll into my hands. For a moment, the hall erupted, cheers, claps on the shoulder, warm words from men who knew what it meant to stand where I had just stood. The king smiled from his throne, Valdor beamed at my side, and the pride in the chamber wrapped around me like a cloak. One by one, handshakes followed, firm grips, laughter, well wishes. "Guard now," one of them said with a grin. "Not just in spirit, in truth." I tucked the proud package into my rider's pouch, the silver tassels peeking out. With my duty clear and the king's trust marked in ink and steel, I turned toward the light of the hall's great doors. By noon, I was on the road back to the ranch, orders in hand, honor at my back, and the weight of new responsibility riding with me. Chapter 18 Surprises. The sun was sinking low by the time my griffin's wings carried me over the last rise. The ranch below glowed in the soft amber light of evening, the roofs catching fire with sunset, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. From the house, I heard the faint clatter of pots, the hum of voices, and a sudden peal of laughter that drifted across the yard. Supper time. I reined the griffin down into the yard, its talons throwing up a spray of dirt as it landed. Sliding from the saddle, I patted the dark feathers of its neck and reached for the pendant at my chest. The rune hummed under my thumb. With a shimmer of light, the great bird vanished, leaving only a faint breeze behind. For a moment, I considered heading straight for the house. My stomach certainly wanted me to, but instinct tugged me elsewhere. Chili first. Always chili. My boots crunched over the packed earth as I jogged toward the barn, now finished and standing proud against the evening sky. When I swung the doors open, the lantern glow inside washed over me, warm and steady. And what I saw made me freeze in the doorway. Cindy sat perched right on top of Chili's broad back, her legs dangling over one side like she was riding the biggest pony in Azeroth. In her lap was a book, open wide, and she was carefully sounding out each word as she read aloud. Chili lay stretched across the straw, head turned toward her, eyes half-lidded in what looked like contentment. His ears twitched at her voice, and every so often he gave a deep rumble, like he understood every word. "Well," I said, leaning on the doorframe with a grin, "that was a short shopping spree." Both their heads turned, hers startled, his lazy and deliberate. Cindy's eyes lit up, and Chili huffed a long breath, shifting beneath her like an oversized horse. "Uncle Don?" Cindy squealed, but she didn't climb down. Not yet. Chili heaved himself to his feet with surprising grace for a beast his size, Cindy riding him high on his shoulders. Before I could say a word, he padded straight toward me, and before I knew it, a huge, wet tongue dragged across my face. I laughed, wiping my cheek. All right, buddy. I missed you too." And then his massive head dipped, and he rammed me square in the belly with a playful but solid headbutt that knocked the wind clean out of me. Oof! I doubled over, hands on my knees, gasping. "Yowl!" came Chili's rumble, low and firm. Cindy slapped her hands over her mouth, eyes wide. "Word I'm not allowed to say," she gasped. Then, looking right at me, she added, "You didn't tell him you were going, and he was worried about you." Still bent over, I blinked at her in shock. "Wait, what? Cindy, did you just translate for him?" She nodded earnestly, sliding down from Chili's back as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Of course. He talks to me." I dropped to the hay with a thud, still catching my breath, staring at the two of them like I'd lost my mind. "He talks to you?" Cindy just smiled sweetly, scooped up her book, and gave Chili a quick kiss on the nose. "I gotta go in for dinner now, Chili." She turned toward the door. skipping as if nothing about this was unusual. Hiff, rumbled Chili, his voice softer now. Oh, I will! Cindy called back without missing a beat, and then she was gone, the barn door swinging shut behind her. For a long moment, I sat there in the hay, staring at the empty doorway, then back at Chili, who just blinked at me with that slow, steady patience of his. I pointed at him, still shaking my head. Don't go anywhere, buddy. I've got good news for you. Pushing myself upright, brushing straw from my uniform, I gave him one last look before turning toward the ranch house, my mind still spinning with the revelation. Cindy could hear him? Cindy. Dinner could wait a few minutes longer. I had a lot to think about, and Chili had no idea what was coming. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread hit me as soon as I stepped in from the yard. The kitchen glowed with lamplight, the big hearth roaring, and the long, picnic-style table was already crowded with my family. At once the chatter hushed, and then came the cheer. Laughter, clapping, voices rising as they spotted me. I barely made it 3 steps before hands were on me. Dad clapped my shoulder hard enough to jar my teeth. Ernie gave me a shove in the back that nearly sent me into the breadbasket, and Mom smacked me on the rump with her apron before grabbing my face and planting a kiss on my cheek. Irene squeezed past to hug me from the side. Nimicie only waved with a smirk from where she was already shoveling food into her mouth. I grinned, dodged a half-hearted swat from Ernie, and circled the table to drop into the seat beside Nimicie. She gave me a sly smile around a mouthful of potatoes and elbowed me as if to say, "What kept you?" I reached for a plate, heaped it full, and settled in as the evening's stories tumbled over one another. Dad and Ernie took turns bragging about finishing the barn. Strong enough to hold a storm at bay, Dad claimed, while Ernie swore the rafters could carry 10 more years of snow without a groan. Nimicie and Irene laughed over their shopping trip, acting as if they'd conquered half the markets of Ironforge in a single afternoon. Mom chimed in about finishing the still and wagged a finger around the table. If any fool touches that dwarven ale before it's had a good 3 weeks to cure, I'll have their hide nailed to the door. Cindy, as always, drowned out everyone with 100 half-finished stories, school adventures colliding with wild tales about Chili. The bear's name came up so many times in her babbling that it felt like he was seated with us, only too big to fit on the bench. The food dwindled plate by plate, mugs drained and refilled, the glow of supper mellowing into quiet satisfaction. That was my moment. Clearing my throat, I set down my fork and reached into my rider's pouch. "I've got news," I said, glancing first at Nimicie, then around the table. "Chili's been drafted. King's Guard, Animal Companion Branch. There was a ceremony, full witness, scroll, the whole bit." Gasps and chuckles circled the table, Ernie banging his mug against the wood in excitement. Mom muttered something about needing a bigger barn if we were going to house royalty now. Cindy squealed outright, bouncing in her chair until Irene grabbed her wrist before she toppled the fruit bowl. I leaned close to Nimicie, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Your sister still sleeps. Valdor says it stinks of a trap, meant for us both. He gave me the map." Sliding the parchment under the table, I pressed it into her hand, along with the sealed envelope. "And these, your orders." Her eyes sharpened at once, but she tucked the map into her lap, leaving it for later. With a careful hand, she cracked the wax seal on the envelope. The room quieted as she unfolded the letter, the rustle of parchment loud in the hush. Before she could read, Dad spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of the old soldier he once was. "If that bear's in the King's Guard, then by thunder we should have a ceremony here. Full dress uniforms. Tomorrow after school, we'll welcome him into the family proper." The cheer was immediate. Mugs lifted, voices booming in agreement. Nimicie smiled faintly, then raised her free hand to settle everyone. "One moment, let me finish this." She straightened the page and read aloud. "Lieutenant Nimicie Mondor, you have been hereby transferred to the King's Guard, pending your completion of 3 months of intensive training at the King's Guard Academy for Animal Companions. This order is pending your agreement. If agreed, you will have 2 weeks to report to Major Boyd, Dean of the Academy in Grizzly Hills, Northland." The room erupted again, clapping, stomping, cheers rattling the rafters. Cindy nearly fell off her chair, clapping so hard, Ernie whooped, and even Dad cracked a grin that made his mustache twitch. Nimicie held up her hand again, this time with a firmer command, and continued. At the bottom is a note from His Majesty. She paused, her voice softer now, eyes scanning the words. Then she read on. Nimicie, my sweet, if you accept these orders and pass, and if you insist on marrying that stubborn, boneheaded Zart, then I will give my permission. But he still must complete his document and quest to gain citizenship. P.S. Magni Bronzebeard has already said he will sign it next time he sees Don for the dwarves. And I will sign it for the humans. That just leaves the gnomes, Draenei, and Worgen to finish the document. For a long heartbeat, the room was still. Nimicie pressed a hand over her mouth, tears welling as she whispered, almost in disbelief, We're getting married. The silence broke like a dam. A roar of joy shook the kitchen. Cheers, shouts, chairs scraping back as everyone leapt to their feet. Mom seized Nimicie in a crushing hug, Dad slapped me on the back hard enough to rattle my ribs, and Cindy squealed so loud I thought my ears might bleed. Ernie whooped and danced a jig around the table while Irene clapped and laughed until tears streaked her cheeks. I sat stunned for half a moment, the words echoing in my chest, then grinned so wide it hurt. Nimicie turned, still tear-bright, and threw herself into my arms. The kitchen was alive with celebration, voices tumbling over each other, the fire crackling like it wanted to join in. And for the first time since we dragged Chili off the mountain, the future didn't feel so heavy. It felt bright. The kitchen was still ringing with laughter and clattering mugs when Cindy shot up from her chair like a firecracker, racing in circles around the table. I'm going to be the flower girl, she shrieked at the top of her lungs. I need a dress, Ma. A new one. A proper one with ribbons and lace. She tugged at Mom's sleeve, then darted to Irene, then spun in dizzy circles until she nearly toppled into the breadbasket. The whole family roared with laughter, the firelight gleaming on mugs and smiling faces. Nimicie leaned into me and slid her hand over mine under the table. I felt the pressure of her fingers, subtle at first, then more insistent. She caught my eye, then flicked her gaze toward the front porch. I understood. Rising from my chair, I excused myself with a grin, slipping past Cindy's whirlwind and Irene's protests. Nimicie followed a moment later, her hand brushing my back as we slipped out into the cool night air. The porch was quiet, the stars already prickling above the pines. Nimicie stopped just outside the door, turned, and pressed herself into my arms. I wrapped her close, breathing in the faint scent of wood smoke and soap in her hair. She leaned her head against my chest, and I kissed her softly on the crown. When she looked up, her smile was radiant, almost disbelieving. Don, I need a few hours with just you and me. No family, no Chili, no interruptions. Just us. My heart swelled at the way she said it, soft but fierce, as though the whole world could wait so long as she had this moment. I glanced past her shoulder and spied the horses tied at the hitching post. With a grin, I whispered, Then let's ride. Her answering kiss was quick and warm, and in minutes we were mounted and riding side by side down the moonlit roads of Lochmoden. The clop of hooves echoed in the night, the breeze cool on our cheeks, and for once the weight of the world felt far behind us. We rode at an easy pace, Nimicie's bow bouncing at her shoulder, the horses content to follow the rutted lane. She turned her head, her eyes curious in the dim light. What was the best thing about growing up here, Don? I chuckled, searching my memory as the countryside rolled past. Oh, so many things. I lifted a hand, playing tour guide as we ambled along. There's the swimming hole we all used to sneak off to. I'm sure the kids still do. It's also where I saw my first naked girl, skinny dipping in the moonlight. Nimicie's eyes widened, and I grinned. Careful, though. Snapping turtles there, big enough to take a toe clean off if you're not watching. She laughed, shaking her head. And there's the stream, I went on, pointing left where the trees broke open to a silver glimmer of water. Me and Dad would pull out yellowtail trout by the basketful when I was a boy, fresh fish fried in Ma's iron skillet. Nothing like it. The memories came easier as we rode. There's the little church where Ma would take me. She never forced me inside, but we'd sit on the steps and listen to the singing. She'd tell me stories of the dwarven gods, her voice mixing with the hymns, and the falls, Lord, the falls, where I'd leap as a youth to shave a mile off the walk to the wetlands. My voice softened. And Danny lived right over that ridge. I paused, frowning. The farmhouse I remembered should have been there, light glowing in the windows, but the night stretched dark and empty. What happened to Danny's place? I asked aloud. That's when Nimicie reined in sharply, her hand darting out to snatch the reins from my grip. My horse snorted in protest as she turned us both toward a side road. Don, she said firmly, her eyes locking on mine. Listen to my whole story before you get mad at me. Promise me that first. My gut clenched, but I nodded. She led us through the Dixon Ranch gates, the wooden archway standing crooked against the starlight. We stopped before the house, or what was left of it. The stone walls still stood blackened, but everything else was ash and ruin. The barn and stables were intact, shadows hulking against the moon, but the house itself was hollow, gutted by fire. Nimicie tied off her horse, then mine, and we walked together across the charred yard. The smell of smoke still clung faintly, though the fire had long died. My throat tightened as she began to speak. The other night, right after you left, she said quietly, there was a fire here. Despite all the neighbors pitching in, it burned until the early hours of morning. Ernie and your father rushed in, saved Ma and Pa Dixon, and Danny, who was visiting on leave. They brought them all back to the Zart Ranch. Food, comfort, clothes, anything to keep them steady. She stopped at the threshold of the ruins, her fingers brushing the blackened stone. Her voice trembled as she went on. The fire marshal came before dawn, told them the truth. The barn and stables were spared, but the house was lost. All of it. Danny was furious, but he knew it was an accident. His ma left a pot of oil on the stove. One moment's mistake, and their life was gone. Her shoulders sagged, a sigh shuddering out of her. Danny begged them to move into a retirement community, said they were too old to run the ranch anyway. And they agreed, Don. They'd welcome the rest, but everything they had burned here. I saw her lift her hand to wipe at a tear that had slipped free. She looked at me then, her eyes glistening. Don, I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand the look on their faces. And I knew Danny, your friend, he'd never forgive himself if they lost everything. She swallowed hard, drew in a breath, and held out a folded deed. So I made a choice. Don't be angry, please. But I offered them 4 diamonds for the ranch as it stood. To make it easier, I added a 5th if they'd throw in sugar beet. A faint, watery smile touched her lips. Danny made me promise we'd keep a garden full of sugar beets for the horse, and I did. She pressed the deed into my hands, her voice breaking. That's 200,000 gold in this realm, Don. I know it was rash. I know I should have waited, but the family needed saving. I only hope. Her words cracked, and she pressed her face into my chest, sobbing softly. I only hope you'll forgive me. I stood silent for a long moment, holding her against me as her shoulders shook. The burnt stone, the empty windows staring like eyes, it all blurred around me. Slowly, gently, I lifted her chin until her eyes met mine. There's nothing to forgive, Nimicie, I whispered. My thumb brushed the tears from her cheeks. I love you. I am so proud of you, and I am honored that you're going to let me be your husband. Her breath hitched, her tears falling faster, but she smiled through them, radiant and broken all at once. I bent and kissed her, holding her as though the ruined house itself might crumble further if I let go. When at last she drew back, I forced a grin, trying to lighten the heaviness pressing down. So, I said, lifting the deed still crumpled in my fist, what are we going to name our new ranch? Her laugh came soft but real, a spark of warmth in the cold yard. The King's Guard Ranch, she said with a chuckle, wiping her cheeks. Ha! Done, I declared, tucking the deed safely into my belt. She laughed again, leaned into me, and together we stood there in the ruins, holding each other as the night spread wide above us. And though the Dixons had lost their home, and though the road ahead was shadowed with war and worry, in that moment there was hope. Hope built not of walls or timber, but of love, strong enough to carry us both. We strolled hand in hand across the grounds, the cool night air carrying the scent of pine and ash from the ruined Dixon house. My boots crunched softly in the dirt, Nimicie's steps light beside me as she tugged me along. We were exploring now. Our ranch, though the words still felt strange in my head. Past the blackened stone walls, we came to a smaller outbuilding tucked at the edge of the trees. I tugged the door open, and the smell of hickory and oak rolled out. Racks lined the walls, and a pit dug in the center was black with old char. A smokehouse, still sound, ready for work. I could almost taste the salted hams and dried trout hanging from those rafters. But that wasn't all. Behind it, hidden by the tree line, a pond spread wide and quiet under the starlight. Its surface rippled with silver flashes as fish rose to snatch at moths. No one had said a word about it, and I chuckled at the thought of the bounty waiting there. "Looks like the Dixons forgot to mention a secret or two," I murmured. And then the barn. A proper barn this time, twice the size of ours. Inside, it was like walking into a treasure trove. Tools neatly lined, riding tack polished and hung, saddles oiled and waiting, plows, harrows, gear enough to run 3 farms. I turned in a slow circle, whistling low. "We won't want for much here," I said. Nimicie only grinned, tugging me toward the stables. A single lamp burned low within an arc, throwing warm light across the rows of stalls. At the far end, a soft whinny greeted us. Sugarbeet lifted her head, ears twitching, and stamped once as though to say, "Welcome home." Nimicie's smile softened. She reached into her rider's pouch and pulled out 2 sugar beets, holding them flat on her palm. The mare's velvet lips worked them away with eager crunches, and Nimicie stroked her muzzle fondly. "Don't tell your mom," she whispered with a mischievous wink. I arched a brow. "Mom's kitchen? You took those from Mom's kitchen? Oh, you're in trouble." I sang, drawing the words out just to watch her laugh. She turned on me in a flash, shoving at my chest until I stumbled back into the hay. "Are you going to rat me out, Don?" she teased, straddling me, her fists batting playfully at my shoulders. I grinned up at her, feigning thought. "I don't know. What have you got in trade?" Her laughter turned sly as she leaned down, pulling at my belt, her breath warm on my skin. And then, with a wicked smile, she took me in her mouth. My head rolled back, a groan torn from my throat. "I never saw a thing," I managed, just before my eyes fluttered shut in pure delight. Afterwards, we lay tangled in the hay, the lantern's glow soft around us. Nimicie's head rested on my chest, her breath slow and steady, my arms wrapped around her as if I could keep the whole world away. We whispered of plans, what to plant first, how to mend the fences, where Cindy would build her fort. Dreams spun in the dark, promises made in the quiet. And as sleep took us, I swore I felt Sugarbeet watching from her stall, calm and approving, as though even she knew the ranch was in good hands now. That night, in the heart of the stables, wrapped in love and hay dust, the King's Guard Ranch was born. End of chapter 18.